Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 136. As always, I'm going to start us off with a bit of a tune. Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 136. As always, I'm going to... What is that?
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives need, to wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new gods, sullen peoples, have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threats of terror, and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's not that hidden for, leaving all your hopes to loss. Take up the white man's burden, not tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living, and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his soul's reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor, are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian guys? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to this, nor call too loud on freedom, to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy young grudge praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years, the words with dear bought wisdom, the judgment joy of years. Take off the white man's burden through all of endless years.
Okay, that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Do go and check out his YouTube channel with a famous poem from Rudyard Kipling, turned into a great song, in my opinion. Good evening to my guests this evening, Mitch, Mr. Streets, and Adaman. How are you going, gentlemen?
Same old, same old.
Says the man of 1,000 avatars. How are you going, Mr. Streets?
I tell you what, it's interesting talking about poems by Kipling. What's your view on The Man Who Would Be King? Because I can't get enough of it, both the movie and the actual texts.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent story, and the movie ain't bad. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, classic.
One of the things about that poem, about that story and the movie that's based on it, is that, of course, British soldiers could, when they finished their service, they could, if they wanted to, be discharged in India, and some of them were, which is what those two guys did, who were the heroes of that film.
When they get discharged in India, sorry to get stuck into the meat of it, but were they given anything, or was it like the movie where they had to figure it out for themselves?
Oh no, it was like the movie. They had to figure it out for themselves. Although, of course, they still got their army pension, which was it actually went further in India than it would have done if they'd gone back home to the UK.
Might be an interesting thing of comparing different empires' retirement systems, because I think about how a Roman legionary get a piece of land at the end of their service. I mean, we had more than enough space to do that. Anything like that in Australia, or no? Or
not really, no. The British didn't really go in for that. Again, basically, if you were in like somewhere like India or Australia or New Zealand, South Africa, or Canada, if your service finished when you were in those countries, or those territories as they were back then, you could certainly take your discharge in those countries, and quite a lot of people did, but more of them did so in places like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, or South Africa, than did in India, of course.
Okay.
Adaman, how are you going, mate?
Yeah, good. Yourself?
Yeah, good. I'm very happy to have you back on the stream. You've been missed, but I know you've been working very hard, so fair enough.
I probably won't be on next week though.
That's okay, mate.
Being that it's the British event.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, you going to that, are you?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent, mate. Excellent. I'm trying to help Lady of Shalott organise one in Australia, because I think we really need one in Melbourne, to be honest with you. And I know already about half a dozen people who would come to that, including myself.
To be honest, if you did one in Australia, I'll probably come down.
Oh man, well that would be great. That's another reason to do one.
Yeah.
We could go and have a couple of beers. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, guys. I'm just going to ask Mitch before we go on further, because I asked, and I'm sure people in the chat were wondering. I believe your avatar is a pretty famous Russian singer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a guy called Victor Soy, who, best to explain, would be something like, imagine like his songs are like kind of like the Smiths, but then he's got the same fame as Freddie Mercury does, but for the Russian-speaking world. And he's also got like an additional fame because he died young, so he's also got a sense of martyrhood, because a lot of his songs were veiled critiques of the Soviet system in the 80s. Like, if you're a young man growing up in the Soviet Union in the mid to late 80s, you probably listened to this guy's music as a means.
And you can find him on YouTube, Mitch?
Yeah, the band he played for is called Kino, Kino, Kino.
Cool, Mitch. Cool.
Or you can just search up his name, Victor Soy. You can find his songs anyway, with English subtitles.
Excellent. Did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up this evening, Mitch?
I haven't really looked up anything along. I mean, there's this Argentina election where the ultra-libertarian bloke won. I don't really know too much in depth about the guy other than he's just the most libertarian guy I think you can ever think of.
What? So a libertarian bloke is the head of a government when, like, extreme libertarians don't really believe in governments. That will be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, apparently there was one speech where he said about how, because he wants to legalize all drugs, and he says, okay, if you want to shoot yourself to death with drugs, go ahead, but don't expect me to pay for your hospital bills or whatever. That's essentially his gist about how society should function.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Puffwagon in the chat is saying he's a small hat. I don't know. But...
No, I mean, he's very pro-Israel, but it's not Jewish himself. He's just a massive... Yeah, apparently he wished he could be Jewish. I think that's where people misunderstood him.
Oh, okay. That sounds fair enough. Like I say, I don't get too caught up in the JQ stuff. I mean, I think there is some truth in it, but I think some people go well overboard about it. Military theorist says he's not our guy. No idea. I'm not a libertarian. When I was much younger, I used to kind of be a bit libertarian-ish, but I was never a full-on libertarian. Sagarnet says Falklands War 2 will be interesting. Yeah, it will be, given the tiny size of the Royal Navy these days. But yeah, but we'll see.
I mean, is Argentina ever going to be capable of trying to retake them again? Because their economy is still a basket case.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I also... Argentina was supposedly getting Danish F-16s, which are quite old model F-16s. But now apparently they're going to Ukraine. So
I was just going to say that,
yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, because the thing was Argentina was trying to buy Chinese fire bombers, and the Americans didn't like that. So they said to the Argentinians, well, we'll get the Danes to sell you their F-16s that they're going to retire. But now these F-16s are apparently going to the Ukraine. So who knows what's going to happen there. I thought it was okay, because like had Argentina got old Danish F-16s, then the RAF Typhoons on the Falklands, and we have a flight of Typhoons based on the Falklands, would have been much superior to them. But maybe not so much if they buy these more modern Chinese aircraft. So we'll see what happens. And if Argentina can even afford to do it. So who knows?
What's your guys' view on why Argentina has never taken off economically for about 100 years? Everyone's got a different opinion on this, so you know.
And yet, at one stage, they were doing quite well. Yeah,
precisely. This is the thing. I can't remember who it was, but they said there's 4 types of economies in the world: capitalist, communist, Japan, and Argentina. Those are the 4 main.
Yeah, I got a post on Twitter one time. There's a guy called Simon Kuznets, I think his name was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know too much about the guy, to be fair, but I mean that quote says it all. Up until the First World War, they were like one of the top 10 growing economies. Nowadays,
they were having dreadnoughts built for them. You know, like big, powerful modern battleships prior to the First World War. So absolutely correct, Mitch. Yeah.
Farmland, everything.
Yeah. So I mean, I know. I think it's a Chubut region where there's still like 2,000 families there who speak Welsh. They had like.
But they took that region over quite a lot later, didn't they? When they were already sort of well into decline. It was sort of like I don't know. They sort of tried to sort of physically grow their way out of stagnation.
Well, through importing new people. Okay.
Well, they because they took over. They took over. What's the name of the region? Patagonia.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit later.
1880s, I think, when because they had the
and they were having massive civil wars in South America at that stage. Sorry, not civil wars. They were having massive wars in South America at that stage as well.
Yeah, was it Gauchos, I think they were called, like the cowboys, but for Argentina or something like that.
Yep, that's them.
I know that
that
recently there was a thing where they were trying to get, I think, Welsh speakers from Wales, presumably, to move over there and become administrators or some such in the last couple of years, I believe.
Might even be a good deal for a guy to do
recently.
that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that was quite recently. I might have to check.
They say that Buenos Aires is like the best bang for your buck, like in terms of safe, basically Western civilization city, because the inflation has been so bad. If you have any foreign currency, you can basically live like a king at the moment. Oh, this guy's Argentinian. What does he say? What does he say?
Oh, there you go, Duke Valentino. He's quite correct also that Argentina did have an independent aircraft industry for a while, and it was mostly thanks to Germans who moved over there after World War II. I know also they had a big a big number of Italian immigrants as well. I think even Galtieri, the guy who was in charge at the time of the Falklands War, was of Italian descent.
Yeah, apparently it's Italian architecture in Buenos Aires, but I've never been.
Yeah, I don't know why did they go downhill in the 20th century. I have no real idea about that, mate, to be honest. I mean, I guess that maybe the products that they were selling, which would have been mostly agricultural stuff, including beef and what have you, maybe those things went down in value. I don't know.
I think a lot of their debt was denominated in foreign currencies. And so when your currency tanks, like all of a sudden in real terms, like your actual debts double or triple, even though it's the same on paper, because you've got to pay in foreign currency, right?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, I had no idea that Argentina had elected a libertarian as their president. So that will be interesting.
Yeah. Isn't his running mate, I don't know, maybe you know more about this, but isn't his running mate like a cosplayer or something?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Is that true?
Is that true? I don't no idea, gents. This was Mitch's subject, and I don't know anything about it at all.
Wasn't that his wife or something?
His wife's a cosplayer. That's more acceptable, to be honest, because that's a girly thing. I mean, you know, if a woman likes getting dressed up as cartoon characters, frankly, I don't care, because women just like that stuff. So, fair enough.
Yeah, I always thought Argentina was one of those. I thought it was still massively Peronist. Where was it the Kirchner family? I think they were called. Who were they dominated politics for a long time, but now they're just seen as like a bad name, like Blair in the UK these days. So, yeah.
I mean, the Peronists were a bit socialistic, I suppose. But yeah, someone is asking me in the chat. Not that one. No, was I? Do I think this? No, I don't. He killed himself and got burnt, and the Russians found his body. So no.
I remember I was speaking to a co-worker some years ago when I was much younger, and he was telling me about this conspiracy theory about how, you know, Hitler escaped to Argentina on a U-boat, and I was like, oh, what a load of shit. A U-boat couldn't make it that distance, and I googled it, and it was like the exact distance that a U-boat could travel as its range was just about to Argentina.
Yeah, no, some German U-boats did make it to South America for sure at the end of the war, rather than surrendering to the Allies, and I can't say I blame them. But Hitler didn't do that. Not a chance.
There's a particularly beautiful lakeside town in. I think it's in the province of. It's called Rio Negro. It's a legitimate name for anyone listening in.
Yes, it is.
But yeah, and there's a particularly.
It's a river. It's a river.
Yeah. It's a particularly little, a pretty lakeside town where apparently a lot of them settled down.
Interesting. Do we have any Antarctica people on the stream or in the chat, or no?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm thinking more the gate through to Hyperborea, but
exactly right.
I do it. Raw Biscuit says I like a bit of dress up. No, I don't. I like my goals doing a bit of dress up, but not me. The most dress up I'll do is a black suit. All right, that's as dressed up as I ever get. All right, Mr. Streets, did you have a subject that you wanted us to talk about?
Not particularly, actually. I think I probably got to be off in about 20 minutes or so, but pretty much to anything really. Yeah.
All right, Adam, did you have a first subject for us this evening?
No. I ran for a few ideas, but no.
I know you were talking about something to do with a folding chair, which I knew nothing about until you mentioned it to me. So you please explain that.
So it's basically there's this story of. I mean, I'll go over why I didn't want to talk about it as well. But there's this story of some sort of fight between a black man and either a white woman or a white couple. I'm not sure. In America, and he sort of like battered this woman with a folding chair. The story's kind of implied like they were in the wrong, and he sort of retaliated. But then he was on some Black Power podcast saying that they were saying, "Oh, you know, I was like giving it back to the white people," or something weird like that. There was a lot of racial animus played into this, and from there it kind of showed how these people across the West sort of have that you know, you'll see like Dr. Shola, who's this woman who goes on Jeremy Vine on 5, which is a TV show here in the UK, like a talk show, and she also goes on various other TV shows. She's apparently some Nigerian heiress or something, but she's like a skin intellectual here in the UK now, going around grifting, and you know, she filmed herself on a TikTok like picking up a folding chair from some you know shop somewhere, and you know, this has been a big thing going around, and it's just kind of funny how this sort of racial animus sort of picks off, that you know, like skin intellectuals in Britain or even some in Belgium, I think, as far as Belgium, sort of identified with you know, their group in the US rather than any other identity. But I mean, the reason I didn't want to talk about it is because where does it go? Like, I'm just going to sit here and go, oh, you know, imagine if she was white, she'd get kicked off that show, and we all know how this ends.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the only thing that strikes me about this is that if a white guy got in a fight with a black couple and hit the black woman with the folding chair, we all know what would happen about that.
Well, yeah, and this is the problem with the conversation, is it doesn't really go anywhere. We all know the implications here, and how this works by now. And yeah, it's of course one, like, okay, yeah, like maybe I could well believe that this white couple were causing trouble or something. It's one incident out of thousands.
So why did he hit the woman rather than the bloke? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. But,
you know. Maybe it's the only one he could reach. No
yeah,
clue.
maybe.
It's so uninteresting. I never even bothered looking into it. I was just more interested in how people reacted here in Europe to.
We all know, as you're saying, and that every time this sort of thing happens, there is a way that the Western mainstream media will spin it. We all know that. Yeah,
and beyond that, I don't really. I mean, there was this thing. We had like the Farage with the banking thing. I was hoping to come on last week and talk about this then, like do a final roundup of that whole incident.
Go for it, mate. Go for it. Well, can I just say to Duke Valentino, I don't know how we can talk about Irish influence in Argentina, because certainly myself, and I suspect the other guests on this stream, don't actually know that much about Irish influence in Argentina. I certainly know nothing about it. So, yeah. But yeah, Adam, by all means, do a fairly quick roundup on that stuff, because I thought that was one of our few wins recently.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not really fully over, is it? It's kind of quieting down. Maybe it will just simmer off into nothing, and that'll be the end of it. I mean, the only thing that I found of real particular interest was that Coates was way more tied up than I originally thought in ESG trading. You know, I actually had a little look and I found an article from, I believe it was about 5 years ago, where they were talking about they were talking about how they had to diversify their stocks from ESG trading, but they essentially just went into green stocks. So it's just kind of more of the same. But I think we need to wait a bit longer and see if this story actually goes anywhere.
The main thing I liked about what Farage was doing, Adam, was when he was trying to get together with other people who'd been debanked. And if anything happens with that, then it will be worth seeing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it was so typical of like the British establishment, where their comeback to oh, you know, he wasn't fired for political reasons. It's actually because he's broke. Like, you know, he's broke after claiming he's a grifter for God knows how long. Which, you know, maybe there's, you know, a chance that he does grift on occasion, selling whiskey and gold and other such things.
I mean, did you see the stuff on Twitter, Adam, where they were talking about Maloney in Italy specifically, but like someone turned around and said, I think it was Orrin McIntyre actually, who turned around and said, what they do is they take someone who is a moderate, like Maloney, who really is a moderate actually, and they pretend she's a far right neo-Nazi. So that there's no possibility of anyone who's really right-wing ever getting anywhere, because they just moved the Overton window that way. I thought that was a good observation from Orrin McIntyre, and absolutely true.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's as accurate for someone like Farage, but there are certain things that mean that Farage kind of could end up fulfilling that end of the spectrum, even if just by pure accident, on his own part, I should say. You know, like, he's very much someone that is trapped in, let's say, what some might call the boomer truth regime, right? He's still trapped in this idea of like, my 80s classical liberalism.
Do you really think he is, or do you think he just pretends he is?
No, he is. Like seeing him argue with Peter Hitchens on drugs when he got him on to talk to him, kind of, I think highlighted that. You know, they spent, what was it, like a 15-minute interview, and they just kept getting stuck on this one point all the time, because Farage wants to believe in this sort of, it still wants to believe in this sort of quite liberalish fantasy about, you know, people making informed decisions or some such, or, you know, he's still got a little bit too much libertarianism in him, maybe, and particularly old cringe libertarianism.
Yeah, you might be right. Look, I my own views on drugs are not exactly Peter Hitchens, to be honest with you. But maybe that's because I've got a bit of that in me too, and also because I believe intelligent people can make intelligent decisions. But I increasingly realize that most people are not all that intelligent. But you know. A bit like Mr. D says on AA streams, you know, there is something in this. There's some truth in this, that you know, some people can make intelligent decisions. A lot of people can't, sadly. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, if the right was ever right about anything, it was the hierarchy between people. But it's like, I mean, Nigel Farage, of all people, surely understands this more than anyone. Like, he's had to sit at the forefront of, you know, political campaigns which have banked on the fact that some people are just very low info and have to be sort of, you know, brought to the table. You know, essentially dragged to it in some instances.
This is what gets on my nerves about soccer fans, football fans, who will put up with their team kneeling to Black Lives Matter before every game and not just boo them out of existence and actually stop paying for their tickets. Or another example would be the Women's World Cup, which no one really cares about. But all of a sudden I had people actually talking to me about it. And I'm going, I don't watch blokes football, never mind bloody women's. I mean, you know, I don't care who wins the Women's World Cup. It's irrelevant. A group of 15-year-old schoolboys would beat them.
Well, actually, Raw Biscuits in the chat, me and him were talking about this quite recently, and he was saying, he was pointing out just how heavily this stuff was sort of being pushed. Even the women in my office noticed this. Like, one of them pointed out, she said that, like, you very rarely hear, like, people on the TV refer to the England team as the Lions or the Free Lions, and yet the tag Lionesses is really pushed quite hard. It's really heavily used in the old marketing material.
I liked the thing that was on Twitter, and I reposted it, where it was not, instead of Free Lions, it was Free Irons.
Yes, yeah, I did see that. But you saw this as well with the cricket a short while back. You know, the women's cricket was really heavily pushed. I'll be honest, I felt quite sorry for them, because when the old the British cricket Twitter account was pushing or the England cricket Twitter account was pushing the photos, like the stands were empty. You know.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. Mr. Streets, what's your view on this pushing of gender stuff and all
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Did you see that thing on Twitter where it was that guy on a plane and everyone is watching the Women's World Cup except this one guy? Did you see that go? The craziest thing about
and he was watching Lord of the Rings. It was great. I said on Twitter, I would have been that guy watching Lord of the Rings 100%.
But the craziest thing about that, and it shows how fake the viewership is, like that whole tweet was like everyone else was watching the Women's World Cup final, and it wasn't. It wasn't it was like they were at the quarterfinal stage, and it just shows that there's no one actually following the details at all. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it'll blow over in a couple of years. Maybe they'll keep pushing it. We'll see. I actually had a point from before about the debanking campaign.
Yeah, go for it.
How does this link in? Do you guys have any opinions on Elon Musk's statement that Twitter will fund the legal bills of people who get deplatformed because of their tweets?
I saw that. It's interesting, but it also kind of seems like there's a bit of there's some technicalities sort of nestled in that statement in some of the language he used, which I don't know. I'd like to see a case play out first, but it seems pretty optimistic if it's actually something he thinks he's going to
potentially could be good. Potentially could be good. I do. I mean, another thing I noticed is that Twitter wants to get rid of the block function. Or X, as we should now call it, I suppose. They want to get rid of the block function. And as far as I'm concerned, one guy on there I saw said, yeah, this is because of the ads. And I do this, I block advertisers I don't want to see on my feed. And I reckon that's the main reason that's going to happen.
I actually do the same. And I use the block button meticulously.
Yeah, I use it a lot. Extreme lefties, extreme feminists, anyone like that, and as I say, adverts. Yeah, I block all that crap if I can, and I reckon it's the adverts is the main reason that Musk wants to get rid of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've made like statements, and then I've had some guy going through 4 years of my tweets, replying to everything. I don't want to have to deal with these people. Block. Yeah. I use it very, very thoroughly. But yeah, I mean the Elon Musk statement. That's I mean that's quite a bold position to take, isn't it? Because that could potentially be quite a lot of money that
it's an incredible statement. Yeah. What is it? Does he mean worldwide as well? Like worldwide legal bills of anyone who gets a claim. Like it seems very broad.
Yeah, is he going to back up the statements of dissidents in far off Asian countries or something like that?
I doubt it myself, but yeah, we'll see. The proof's going to be in the pudding on this one, and we'll see what they actually do.
Sure.
I mean, Alice Little is saying I use an ad block on everything. Yeah, I do too, Alice. Until I tried to get back onto Twitter X after I'd signed out, because I don't like to be signed in there all the time. And I couldn't because my ad block was on. I had to get rid of my ad block before I could sign in again. So, yeah.
And I think on Twitter it doesn't thoroughly work that way, does it? Because it's done through tangentially organic tweets made by actual accounts. And then there's just a promote function to push them out there more widely.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it's not like a specific pop-up that can be so easily blocked by a Google extension.
It's just another tweet. Yeah, exactly. Like I blocked one today from Adidas, which was going on about the Women's World Cup. Not interested in that propaganda, so I just blocked it. But yeah, I absolutely. Raw Biscuits is asking you, Adam, do you think the regime would use it as a weapon against it?
That's quite a tough question, because they don't like that though, do they? They don't like to take battles like that.
Yeah, and Musk is not the easiest person to take on if you're a regime guy.
No, they seem perennially just completely terrified that they're going to lose face at any moment. So I think they might consider that a bit too risky. But I could also imagine a lot of really quite jumped up, departments and areas just pushing this, just going forward with this anyway, and just not giving a damn, because it's not them that has to pay the price when Musk's lawyers come in and cause a ruckus further down the road.
Well,
at the end of the day,
Musk
Musk
could afford the best lawyers in the world, so he's
Yeah.
going to have an advantage from that point of view.
Yeah, but the thing is, the same people that I mean, you can kind of see this with this Coots thing, right? With the Farage thing, right?
Mhm.
Coots fired him, and it wasn't the people at Coots that suggested or pushed for the firing that had to take the shit later on. I mean, they did eventually, but it went through quite a few hoops first. It was NatWest, the parent company, and departments much further up the chain, and the HR departments.
Had it not been someone as well known and relatively powerful as Farage, they would have got away with it easily.
Yeah, and you think if it's like the NHS, right? For example, if it's someone in the NHS that gets fired for a statement, the NHS. The people doing the firing for, let's say, a racial statement, which is going to be one of these DEI departments, they don't have to take the crap when it comes to a court case further down the road. That gets shifted onto other departments.
Yep.
And of course that's a weapon that they use as well, is because it's all so broken up that they can rely on these sorts of foot soldiers of theirs to go around and be vicious, because there's no cost coming back to them.
Davey1602 in the chat says, what I don't understand is, why did Coots attack such a high-profile person as Nige? Good point. I mean, maybe they were testing the water.
Mm.
And because if they can get away with Nigel Farage, they can get away with any of us non-entities quite easily.
Yeah. Do you think it was NatWest who made the ultimate, or was it Coots themselves? I know we've got evidence from both, but
I'm not sure. What Adam and Mitch, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it would definitely. It must have gotten the okay from NatWest further down the road, but it could be that a lot of these sorts of positions were taken up from NatWest, I imagine, and then Coots took it from there. Although the lady that was what was it? Because it was the lady that was put in at NatWest, wasn't it? Was where a lot of this stuff I think started from. So I imagine it started from NatWest, the parent company, and then sort of went out to Coots from there.
Could well be. Any opinions, Mitch?
Oh, he's not there.
Maybe he's not there. He might be dealing with his dog or something. But yeah, absolutely. All right, Mr. Streets. I'm trying to think how to put this. What do you think is going to happen in West Africa?
Yeah, it's so interesting. The situation kind of changes every few days, it seems. But basically, the only true way of having an intervention because they've got a country block of 4 different countries now: Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and actually Chad as well. So that's 5 countries. The only way they can have a genuinely effective intervention, I'm talking about the West intervening, is through Nigeria or through Ghana. Just like how in Operation Desert Storm, in order to get to Iraq, the US forces needed to be in Saudi Arabia first. Mm-hmm. So basically, it's all contingent on, is Nigeria willing to push into Niger? And basically, the president is pushing for it. The Senate has blocked it, or their legislature has voted it down. But it's very interesting because there are several groups within Nigeria. So Nigeria is a population of close to 200 million people. It's very ethnically diverse with different tribes, all of them. And
but it's a big and powerful country in West African terms.
Yeah. So their military is a 3 to 4 times the size of these coup countries put together, basically. But there's internal divisions within the military, as there is with so many of the countries in the region. And specifically, the guys in the south are hesitant to do an intervention in the north, and there's a Muslim population of the Hausas, and basically this ethnic group stretches both. It crosses both countries. So in northern Nigeria,
and it's the
southern
major
Israel.
it's the major group in the Nigerian army as well, I believe.
Yes, exactly. And so they're very hesitant to, attack their compatriots, their tribal compatriots. So basically, that's the situation. Nigeria's like deadlocked, and so at the moment, it looks as though they're going to get away with it, and they're going to have this coup faction that stretches from the Sahara right to the Atlantic Ocean. So interesting.
but surely, Mr. Streets, if France allows this to happen, and I think the French are actually the major players here, because if the French actually put in their own military forces, like the Air Force and the French Foreign Legion and what have you, if the French actually put in their own forces, then I think something will likely happen. If they don't, then it won't. But is France willing to be that easily chucked out of their former colonial possessions, which they still keep a pretty tight hold on? But if they do, that's a big policy change for the French.
Sure, and the French have always clung to their empire. No matter how liberal or left-wing they are, they always cling to their empire.
Yep.
So it's interesting. There's actually two optics things for the French at the moment, in my opinion. There's clinging on to their international power in Africa, but basically any attacks or any wars in these countries is going to cause unrest in the non-French population of the inner cities of France, right? Yep. And so the second optic thing is basically for the 2024, or is it 2024? Or the next big Olympics that's coming up in Paris, right?
Yeah.
They want to make it look that it's friendly for tourism and all this stuff. You see what I mean? So literally, if they have massive civil unrest in their inner cities, that's going to make them look bad for these sports festivals. So there's another sort of something to add to the optics in the mix. So
totally agree with you. I mean, like I said, I think it all depends on France. If France decides they're actually going to put in troops, and if they do put in troops, it will be the French Foreign Legion, who are some of the least cut soldiers in the Western world these days, and their Air Force, and possibly their Navy, because they do have an aircraft carrier, which occasionally even operates. It depends on France. If France is willing to actually fight, then I think these coup people might be in a problem, because I don't think, like, because of the war in Ukraine, we've had lots of stuff about, oh no, Wagner's all over that area. Yeah, sure, there are Wagner people in some of those places, but Russia realistically can't logistically support a big campaign there. So it'll be interesting. We'll see. But I do think it all depends on the French. And also, of course, if the French don't do anything, they'll lose to the Americans. And out of all the European powers, the French have the most independent foreign policy. Far more independent than the Brits, for example, who are just basically US poodles.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a scoop on this stream. I know you always tell me not to, but there's a very serious AI riot control software company, basically, in France, and the government has just nationalized it. So maybe that's a sign that they're preparing for all their different options, you know.
Be useful if they get another like Paris burning thing like they had a couple of months ago.
Precisely. Well, that's the idea is if they attack any of these countries, they will most likely win the military war, but how much pain can they take in the riots inside metropolitan France? It's interesting.
Diversity is our strength,
Yeah.
which was always the most bullshit statement that was ever uttered by any human being. But yeah.
Of course. Well, it's interesting. All across the Muslim world and the African world, special hatred is reserved for the French for some reason, and the French colonial administration. I've actually spoken to so many people who regard the British Empire as very mild, but the French, I've never met a Muslim or a pan-Arabist or an African nationalist over here that doesn't really resist the French. That being said, literally, the anti-British sentiment, genuinely, it's only maybe like a quarter of them.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
The British Empire was like the kindest empire in history by a long way. Often too kind for our own good, if I'm going to be honest about it. But yeah, the French, as you rightly say, Mr. Streets, the French cling on to their empire. They still have French Guiana in South America. They still have large territories in the Pacific. Britain's got like 14 overseas territories, but they pale into insignificance in total land area and population compared to the French colonies, which are all supposedly now part of France, but then so was Algeria back in the day.
Sure.
But yeah, so yeah, I totally agree, and the French were not as kind as the Brits, despite their French revolutionary liberal background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last 100 years or 120 years of French history, in my view, is just pretending to be a first-rate great power. Whether it's competing with the Germans, like ridiculously in the First World War, or the Second World War, even though they had much less population and they were always going to lose those wars alone. Back then in the Cold War, it's like, yeah, we're going to nuke our Polynesian islands as well. You know? And now they're doing this thing where they're doing space exploration on their Guyana landmass because it's near the equator, so it's easy to launch rockets.
Yep, they have the European Space Agency based in French Guiana. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Alice Little, not only Guyana and the Caribbean islands, France still has a load of places in the Pacific, like Tahiti, for example. Mutiny on the Bounty, Tahiti, that's French still.
Right. They didn't even relinquish control of Canada. They still have this Saint Pierre and the Miquelon Islands.
Oh yeah, they do. They have a couple of little islands off Canada. Yes, they do.
Yeah,
and they regularly get into arguments with Canada about fishing rights.
Fishing rights and smuggling as well. It was one of the biggest areas in the Prohibition area. So Frank Costello, big New York gangster, basically he went up to this island when the fish reserves were running low, and he said, "I can make you some money." Yeah? And so basically, booze made in Britain shipped over to the Saint Pierre and Miquelon Islands, and then these tiny little boats would go from these islands and smuggle them into New York, and that's where Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello would make $1 billion.
Yep, that's how Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, the very anti-British American ambassador to Britain in early World War II. That's where he made his millions. Absolutely right, 100%. So yeah, I absolutely. I think what happens in West Africa is going to depend on what the French are prepared to do, and of course the French are much more prepared to risk the Foreign Legion in various wars because the Foreign Legion ain't French apart from their officers. So a lot of them are Germans and Slavs and people like that. So yeah, we'll see. And also, like I said, the Foreign Legion are one of the least infected Western military forces with the feminist nonsense, which is like destroying the American, British and Australian armed forces at the moment.
They do. I notice though they do like to deploy the Foreign Legion to keep the peace on the streets when particularly rare rights kick off. Although they didn't use them this last one, I don't think.
No, they didn't.
Are you talking about in
France?
Yeah, in France. Yeah.
They don't tend to use them all that much within metropolitan France. And also the foreign legion that are in France, and most of them are not. Most of them are based overseas.
Yeah.
But the guys who are in France are all in the south of France anyway.
That's where their headquarters is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's somewhere near Marseille, I believe.
Oh
But-
yeah, Nice airport, armed to the teeth. Just every police officer and every gendarmerie. Just it's crazy the amount of militarization over the last couple of years.
But can you blame them? I mean, they've had so many trucks of peace and all the rest of it
Yeah,
in the south of
there's
France.
reason. Yeah.
Look, I'm quite. I think the Foreign Legion are quite a good military force. I'm not sure I'd want to be a member for the simple reason that the French don't really care if you die because you're not French. But apart from that, they're a pretty good military force. And I believe if the French do deploy them in West Africa, I think they'll win for sure.
Sure. It's just a political willpower.
Yeah, there's no point in having the capacity to do something if you're not prepared to use it. But if the French don't use it, then losing basically most of, or 50% of French Northwest Africa, like that's a huge blow, even for someone like Macron. Macron's obviously a soy boy with a old age pensioner wife, but who I guess was his teacher back in the day. But I do. Even for someone like Macron, that is like a real slap in the face for French nationalism if they just let that happen.
Do you know
people go on, of course, about the French wanting uranium for their nuclear power stations, but I don't think that's quite as big a deal as some people think it is.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know anything about the Algerian War?
Yeah, the French Algerian War. Yeah,
Yeah, like because there's two big right-wing figures who gave up a load of territory. Like Franco gave up Tangiers, and de Gaulle gave up Algeria. Were they really losing the war? Or was it?
I don't. I'll tell you what. Look, there's still a bit of Spanish North Africa. Spain still holds quite a lot of bits of North Africa in places, which is one thing I will always say to a Spanish person who talks about Gibraltar. But Frank, I don't know what de Gaulle was thinking when he did that. I think it was his biggest mistake, to be honest. I think France should have gone to the wall for that one, because there were what were they called? The Poids Noirs. The Poids Noirs, yeah. The French people who lived in Algiers and had lived there for generations going back to the 1840s. He just abandoned them. I no idea what de Gaulle was thinking then, to be honest.
And there was over 1 million of them, wasn't there? Or...
Yeah, way over, yeah. But I just think he should. If I'd have been de Gaulle and this supposedly totally nationalistic Frenchman, I would have fought there to the end. And I think part of the reason France has so many immigrants as it has now is that they abandoned Algeria, because half of them come from Algeria, for God's sake. It's just crazy.
Sure.
Well, that's definitely part of the racial animus that you get in France among these people now. You see it comes up quite a lot. They always bring up about France.
I hate France. I'm just going to go and live there, though.
Yeah.
And we get that in Britain with far less reason, because, the French army was a lot rougher in Algeria than the British army ever was anywhere. But anyway.
Well, can you blame them, given what the Barbary pirates did before the French shut them up?
Oh, yeah, look, don't get me wrong, mate. I would have made the British army much tougher than it was on some of these people rebelling against colonial rule. But I just don't get what de Gaulle was hoping to gain from abandoning Algeria. I don't understand it. It's really puzzling to me, because then he left. Well, he didn't leave, but he semi-left NATO. Like the France was only peripherally involved for NATO for years. He builds up the force de frappe, which is their nuclear deterrent and all the rest of it. And they still try and cling on to everywhere else. I don't understand what he was doing. If I'd have been de Gaulle, I would have said, okay, we're going to fight in Algeria and we're going to damn well win. And I would have sent every Frenchman available there until we did win. And they, like every Western army ever, fighting against these people, going right down to South Africa in 1985. We won all the bloody battles. We just never had the political will to win.
Yeah, I don't want to be cynical, but wasn't there several coups from, coup attempts against de Gaulle from some of the French soldiers in Algeria?
But because he abandoned Algeria, that's what caused them.
Ah, right. So I was thinking it might have been the other way around. And it's
No. The OAS and these people, like if you watch Day of the Jackal, for example, or read Day of the Jackal, the novel, it's based on killing de Gaulle because he wants to withdraw from Algeria. But to me, if you're a French nationalist in I don't know, say 1959, why on earth are you going to withdraw from Algeria, which is supposedly part of France?
Yeah, and has millions of French people in there. It's not just about. It's not even a foreign territory.
100%. The Pied Noir, as you were saying, were French people living in Algeria, many of them whom had been there for generations. I don't understand de Gaulle's thinking there at all. I just don't get it.
And they didn't do the Spanish option of keeping a couple of cities. They just, all the way.
Yeah, like the Spanish, as you rightly say, Mr. Streets, they've kept offshore islands and a few enclaves. So that if you were one of those Spanish people who lived in that place, you could go there and still be in your homeland.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't. You have like the northern areas of Algeria. That's where the real people live, like Algiers, Oran, Ters El Kebir, I think the place was called as well, where the French Mediterranean fleet was based.
Yep.
Or was it Toulon? I can't remember.
Ters El Kebir, Toulon's in France.
Yeah, but like with the case of the Spanish, I mean, we've got the Canary Islands, plus also that those two cities, Ceuta and Melilla, I believe I'm pronouncing them right. So I had them, but France never even bothered trying to keep on to. I mean, I could understand giving up the southern part of the country because they were just desert dominated by Tuaregs, who were just more of a nuisance to try and win over, rather than like. So they should have just kept some of the northern cities like on the coastline. But even then, they just went all the way.
No, but they could have kept all of it, Mitch, if France was prepared to fight, and they weren't, and de Gaulle withdrew. And my problem, and what I don't see even now, is given de Gaulle was supposedly a French nationalist, and I believe he was on some levels, why on earth did he do that? It's never made any sense to me.
After all that fighting as well.
I mean, look, they recently lost in Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu and all this stuff, where they really badly lost in Vietnam, partly because the Americans wouldn't fully support them, of course, because America was anti-colonial. But I understand why that didn't work. But why did de Gaulle withdraw from Algeria? It's never made any sense to me whatsoever, to be honest.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And next door as well, in Malta as well, there was a referendum in Malta to have independence from Britain, and the Maltese voted to stay with us, and we still kicked them out.
Labour Party under Harold Wilson, of course. And Harold Wilson, there's been a lot of talk about Harold Wilson was some description of Soviet agent, which I actually think is entirely true. I think Harold Wilson could well have been some description of Soviet agent. There's a reason he retired so suddenly. But yeah.
Yeah, wasn't Belize also going the same way that they wanted to stay with us, then we just made them independent anyway?
Yep, absolutely, 100%. And that's not the only one. There were some Caribbean islands, and that's happened fairly frequently.
Yeah. Instead, John McAfee colonized them instead.
Yeah, Malta's a very good example, Mr. Streets. Thank you. I've known people for more. My brother actually had a Maltese girlfriend for a long time, who was a lovely girl. But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Wilson, I believe there's a lot of rumors that he was some description of USSR agent back in the day. And he retired very, very suddenly and never ever said another word, which I suspect might have something to do with it.
Who do you think was worse, Wilson or Heath?
Ooh, there's a toss-up, eh? Heath, I think, was a bit of a pedophile, to be honest.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know, that yacht of his had a lot of young boys going on it.
Terrible.
Look, we should have had Enoch Powell, in my opinion. He should have been the Prime Minister. But, yeah. Because everything Enoch Powell said has come true, only much quicker than he thought it would.
The thing about Enoch Powell was because he had the working class, like some of his trade unions actually go up to him and go,
Lovely,
say the word and we'll just go on general strike and just paralyze the country until you get into power. And Enoch Powell just went, no, I can't do that, sorry. And he never tried to form his own party or do anything other than just stay in the Tory party, which ousted him anyway. Then he joined the Northern Irish, what party was it? Ulster Unionist Party?
Yeah.
In South Downs, which it just, I mean, I gotta wonder why he surrendered so meekly compared to how he could have fought bitterly with tooth and nail.
Because I tell you what, Mitch, I think it's because he really, really believed in the British parliamentary system, which has actually been dead for a long time.
Well,
but I think Enoch Powell still believed in it in a historical sense.
Yeah, didn't he have that argument? As I go on, please.
I was gonna say, he's also best buddies with that. What was that? Neoliberal economist name? Milton, I think his name was, something like that.
Milton Friedman.
Yeah, I mean that Milton Friedman fella. He supported mass illegal immigration of like Latinos into America. You know, for like jobs that the natives won't do. But then Enoch Powell was best buddies with that guy. I also found that suspicious, to be fair.
Yeah, but I mean, all this, and we get this all the time in the UK, of course. There are jobs, and America gets it to some degree as well. There are jobs that the native population won't do. I just don't believe that's true. If you pay a reasonable wage for a job, people will go and do it. What Britain wants and America wants is to have people being paid below living wage jobs who only survive on welfare.
Well, I mean, half the time it's not even the wages, though. You know, if you look at like farming, they always bring up that like British people aren't willing to be, let's say, fruit pickers. But you can literally point to it down to a window of about 18 months to 2 years where those farms were restructured from having largely English workers to being largely staffed by foreign workers.
Yeah.
You know, and I've actually, I mean, I've seen this firsthand. I've seen not on farms, but in other industries where they'll get a few foreign workers in and they sort of group together as they do. And before you know it, English workers are leaving, moving to other jobs, moving to other industries because they don't like working in these workplaces where they're like the one English guy sitting in a canteen at a certain time.
And everyone else is Polish or Albanian or whatever the hell they might be. 100%. Totally.
On top of that, on top of that, the system punishes seasonal labour Like, for example, you think of a mortgage. You know, you got to put your income statement. It's all yearly stuff, and it's difficult to put in those sorts of seasonal jobs or stuff that lasts a couple of weeks or a couple of months. You know, so then you're pushed into a wagey job, and yeah, so
Yeah, 100%. And it's like as well, another thing that I've constantly noticed is you can go to these farms and they will have these on-site recruitment agencies, but these recruitment agencies are almost always Eastern European companies. And you know, that was kind of these companies were usually brought in during like restructurings, because a lot of these, especially large fruit farms, they're more like corporate entities than actual farms. And you know, and they, you know, you can literally go to an area where they have these farms, and you'll never see a job advertised in the local paper or even in the job centre, but they still fill all these jobs.
100%, Adam. I mean, look, it's also true that, like in Australia, for example, most of the Australian farms, in terms of like banana plantations and many fruit picking organizations and all this kind of stuff, they just wouldn't survive without backpackers who are paid minimum wage and maybe given free crappy accommodation, like free crappy like accommodation as in barracks kind of thing. And without them, they just wouldn't survive. Because why would you, as an Australian dude, go and do that to live that way? And indeed, if you're the head of a family, if you're a dad and a father and a husband, you can't.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, Royal Biscuits said in chat, but me and Royal Biscuits know each other because we used to work in newspaper wholesale when we were both a lot younger. We both worked at the same place, and like I mean, he'll know that you know, the conditions there could sometimes be a bit rough. Those drivers were going out; they were you were working in all sorts of weather. The loads could be quite heavy. It was a heavy, rough job, and it didn't even really pay that well. And you know, I've worked on farms as well. I mean, admittedly, I was you know, manager of quality control, so it's a bit different. But you know, the relative workload was, you know, it wasn't drastically different. You could absolutely find English people to do those jobs if they, and indeed on some farms it's not per se seasonable, though on a lot it is, because obviously you have different fruits for different seasons and various things. But yeah, it's the seasonality comes into it. There's also like an aspect that I think foreign governments actually, like the Polish government, for example, actually does fund these programs to help get jobs for Polish people in Britain, because it's a way of then getting money back to Poland, which has come back to bite them in certain ways, because they've now got a bit of a demographic problem. But you know, and yeah, and of course a bunch of other things, and of course the sort of petty resentment of our elite sorts of comes into this. You know, they see this opportunity, this chance to jump and attack and slag off, you know, the people they're supposed to be ruling over, which is just shows how dysgenic and past the pale they are, and how they should be cleared out.
Well, look, I have worked on a farm, and I remember specifically the reason I did it. I was going out with a girl in a couple of weeks, and so I did 2 weeks working on a British farm in Sussex, in West Sussex, picking potatoes. And I got £5, and this was donkeys years ago, by the way, in the last century. But I got £5 for every full crate I filled with potatoes, which I picked by hand, bending over. And the crates were about 6 foot by 6 foot by 6 foot. Like, I got £5 for doing that, mate. And trust me, at the end of the first week, I virtually hardly could stand up. My back was so bad. And I was a fit young bloke. I was in my 20s, you know. I was a fit young dude back then. So yeah, absolutely right. And £5 for that was a rip-off, man. It really was. It should have been, even back then, it should have been like, I don't know, 12, 15 quid, something like But yeah.
I mean, well, that's the thing. Most of the people on those fruit farms now, the foreign labour, they actually will get paid higher than minimum wage, but because they're housed on site, the fees that they're charged out of their wages for their accommodation is extortionate. It's
pay for their food, pay for their meals. That was the old con that all armies going back to ancient Rome used to do. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and a lot of times these guys are, they're charged more for a caravan that they have to share with another family than what they could pay for like a small house in some areas. So, it's absolute absolute extortion.
Yeah. Look, I've done some rough old jobs in my time. Nowhere near as rough and hard as my dad did, but like I've done some rough and hard jobs in my time, which I think is a good thing for young men to do in many respects, because it teaches you that labor ain't free. But all right, let me segue into Rishi Sunak recently saying he won't have a referendum on net zero, and of course he won't, because he knows damn well he'd lose it.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't like referendums anymore, do they? I mean, they had what was it, David Cameron? He was a bit of a political gambler, and look at what that's cost them. They hate him for it now.
Him and his wife nearly crying on the TV the day afterwards, and I was cheering when we actually voted to leave. Yeah, absolutely, I remember that very well. I sat up all night watching that. And it was great. It was probably one of the happiest times in my entire life when David Dimbleby looked more and more distraught as it became obvious we were going to vote to leave. Oh God, that was so beautiful. I loved it. It was like it gave me hope, most of which I've lost since then. But anyway.
Well, I mean, there was an interesting thing that I was talking to someone else about this the other day, that because I read or seen it somewhere, someone pointed out that about Hillary Clinton calling Trump supporters the deplorables, and like sort of publicly going on TV and
that did
and making
huge amounts of favors, right?
Well, yeah, but the thing is, like going from then to now, that did start a sort of chain reaction of what could be seen as a more acceptable delineation of viewing people through this prestigious versus non-prestigious sort of modern class divide. And the thing is, funny enough, like the same year that was going on in America, the same animus, not animus, but the same attitude sort of popped up out of nowhere here. And you saw this with sort of Remain versus Leave. Where
we were all gammons apparently.
Suddenly it was very acceptable to sort of like viciously attack and shit on people for these sorts of positions.
I'll put my hand up and say, yeah, I'm a gammon. Go for it. But I'm not a gammon that they try and pretend I am. The stupid, fat beer gut dude from somewhere. I'm not that, but yeah, I'm a gammon in the sense of I'm anti-EU, anti-mass immigration, pro-British.
Yeah, and it's kind of I'm not really sure. I mean, we've people in these circles have been talking about what's this? Go back to the Fresh Prince, like this idea of like containment, rolling the clock back. Of course,
it happening.
It is them that overstep the mark. Ultimately, it's always kind of them. They get a bit too hubristic, and they kind of play their hand a bit too heavily. But I don't. Like they must like for all it, like it's kind of acts like a mask, doesn't it? Because they're kind of pretending as if they still got the upper hand, but they won't call referendums on stuff anymore. They don't like to put things to public discussion unless they can absolutely 100% control that discussion. I mean, you look at how like you can look at like Question Time, right? You can look at BBC Question Time and see how like Question Time was transformed as a show. It used to be quite an open platform, and it's just been completely shrunk down to like a shell of its former self.
100%.
So you know that they must be aware of this on some level, and
Well, of course they are aware of it, and that's why we won't get referendums on anything in the future. I mean, they know that the so-called gammon guys are not actually thick, fat blokes from the north. There are a load of people who are actually pro-Anglo-Celtic and British. They know these things. They do, but I mean, they just lie.
I mean, I think a lot of them could probably still believe that the gammon is the gammon, but at the same time,
I don't think they can really.
At the same time, it doesn't matter to them because they're keenly aware that the system that they've built gives each one of those people just as much of a vote. So they need to keep that stuff sort of very much under control.
Yeah. No, look, you're probably right. I have a very low opinion of our so-called, in air quotes, elites, like Rishi Sunak, for example. I mean, Rishi Sunak won't have a referendum on net zero. He won't have a referendum on giving away most British weapons to Ukraine. He won't have a referendum on mass immigration that's legal. And look, I'm on Twitter and I watch on Twitter every day, everyone going on about the small boats. And don't get me wrong, the small boats are bad. But compared to the number of people who are arriving legally, this is small beer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's
one really realizes.
I mean, that's a typical redirection strategy by them, isn't it? They've picked up this contention over immigration in its totality. And obviously that most visually it is most visually striking when you see like the illegals coming over and they kind of grasp on that and make it all about that, and even I think
will repeatedly lie and say, oh no, I'm going to stop it, but you can see he's got no interest whatsoever in stopping it. And why should he? Because he's not Anglo-Celtic, he's an Indian.
Well, did you see that video where he was in India and he was like doing all the really Indian formalities?
Indian independence. He celebrated that hugely. Why is that in any way, shape, or form anything Britain should support? It's just nonsense.
Yeah.
My grandfather fought in India in the 1930s. Did he support Indian independence in 1947? No, he bloody well didn't.
To be fair, neither did most Indians at the time, actually.
Yeah, but, exactly. You could still, Adam, and you could still watch Borden Bankrupt walking around, the YouTuber, walking around in India and having Indians saying, you dudes should come back.
Yeah. I've seen some of those.
Do you recommend anything to read on the opinions of Indians in 1947, like whether they favoured independence or staying with Britain? Or, I mean, is there any like video to watch or book to read on that? Or it's an interesting time period.
Difficult because look, what was going on in India at that time is you had the Pakistani guys who obviously wanted Pakistan, and that caused hundreds of thousands of deaths in 47, 48 as populations moved. That the Labour Party in Britain under Attlee didn't give a shit about, and frankly, I don't totally blame them in that sense. But you've also got to look at what was his name? Not my favourite bloke. King Charles's favourite.
Mountbatten.
Mountbatten, yeah, not my favourite bloke. Mountbatten was the last viceroy of India. And while he was the last viceroy of India, his wife was being, how can I put this politely, screwed by the main Indian dude. So,
really?
Yeah, absolutely, he was. Yeah, there's many proofs in both his and his wife's memoirs. And Mountbatten knew about it and just let it happen. Which to me is like
embarrassing,
like an actual cuck. I mean, I don't. Let me be clear. I don't think there is anything lower in this world than an actual cuck who allows his wife or woman to be screwed by somebody else. I think that is the lowest form of life in the world, even lower, possibly, than LGBTQ trannies. But yeah, that was going on at the time, and that's King Charles's favorite ancestor. That's the guy he looks up to. So yeah, I don't know. But I was never a Mountbatten fan. I mean, Mountbatten was the guy responsible for planning the Dieppe raid by the Canadians and the Royal Marines, by the way. They weren't all Canadians. There were British Royal Marines there as well, which was a complete disaster, basically because Mountbatten couldn't keep his mouth shut about what was going to happen. So again, not a Mountbatten fan at all. This is like, I always do this. This is why I don't like de Gaulle. This is why I don't like Churchill. This is why I don't like Mountbatten. You've got to go and look at what these people actually did, not what their reputation is. Like Mountbatten was murdered by the Provisional IRA, and that was a scumbag act. But the Provisional IRA are the military wing of Sinn Féin, which is currently trying to flood Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, with third world people, Brits out, Somalians in. So all of these people, they've always been the same. There's never been much difference.
It's got to be one of the biggest flips of the last several decades, how the Irish nationalists have turned into globalists. I mean, it's got to be
not really, Mr. Streets, because when I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland in the early 1980s, the leadership of the Provisional IRA, i.e., people like Martin McGuinness and that other scumbag who was more political, they were Marxists.
We covered this, didn't we, with when we had Lady of Shalott on. The IRA that people know of, like the latter half of the 20th century, that we now know of as the IRA, was just a totally different beast to what it was, like 100 years earlier.
Yeah, the early IRA was a bit fashy. The early, official IRA were a bit fashy. That's why Ireland was not all that anti-German, really, in World War II. But the later Provisional IRA, which is a different organisation, and Sinn Féin is really closely related to that, they were Marxists.
Yeah. I still think of that bit where Bowden was saying, what was all that violence and vigour for if they were just then going to turn around and allow themselves to be, replaced in their own homelands.
In their own country. Yeah. Let's kill all these British soldiers and invite Somalians in to rape our virgins. It's a great idea.
Yeah. And you still see it now as well. You'll see they'll have you'll see some random Twitter profile and it'll have hashtag British out, but then they're sitting there simping for mass immigration. It's bizarre.
Yeah. And to be fair, increasing numbers of Southern Irishmen are seeing this and speaking out about it. But of course, like in Britain and in America and everywhere else, and Australia, censorship is tightening and tightening so that anything you say about this stuff can get you banned.
Yeah, and of course, the words alone don't really mean anything. Sorry, Mitch, you go on.
I was going to say, because I used to think that France was going to have more sort of potential for, let's say, spicy stuff to happen to the elites and whatnot. Turns out it's more likely to be Ireland, judging from what I've seen of it. Like Ireland's more likely to, let's say, rise up in a non-electoral way. I won't say much more than that.
Yeah, I mean maybe, but at the same time,
in Minecraft, of course, Susan,
in Legoland World of Adventures. But of course, like what I was going to say on this regard as well is I see a lot of people saying that Ireland is doing more than we do against this sort of stuff, and that is true. But at the same time, we did go through the same phase that Ireland is going through now. We had right-wing political groups on British soil that were close to conducting domestic terrorism, and were actually like causing a lot of shit. And the establishment worked quite hard to put those people away. The National Front.
Go back and look at Jonathan Bowman, for God's sake.
Well, yeah. Later the BNP. I mean, they completely destroyed that party. Literally. People think it was Nick Griffin going on Question Time and getting battered about, but they literally made it. They made it impossible for someone to be a professional and a member of the BNP. If you were found to be a member of the BNP and you were a police officer, you lost your job. Same for teachers and lawyers and basically anything else.
Yeah, it's like, wasn't it Julius Assange who also the doxed all those BNP types as well?
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what could have been, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like on one hand, there are times where I stick up for him, but then I'm reminded of that, and I just go back to wishing them a worse on him. So,
yeah,
Assange, yeah.
I mean, America, like Alex said, I think America is just completely. I mean, you get these gun-toting American nationalist types who the past few years did bloody nothing when you had BLM, COVID, stolen election, resulting in a certain decrepit paedophile getting into power.
Mitch, I don't think there were ever many gun-toting American nationalists. I don't think there were. I think that was a made-up thing by the left and the liberal globalists.
I say nationalists sparingly, to be fair. I mean, I just mean, like, let's say...
I think half of them were probably paid by the FBI,
Sure, but if I go on Telegram right now, I can fish out plenty of Americans who just gob off about the guns all the time. Like, oh, you Brits are cooked. You don't have guns. Meanwhile,
yeah, but
these people don't lift it.
That's a different issue, I suspect.
No, my point is, these people will talk, but they're not better than us. That's my point.
Yeah,
is just...
you see them commenting, all the time. There's something stupid will happen in Britain or Europe, and then some American will comment, well, this is why we love our
happen in the States.
Yeah, and it's just
what's the tax rate now?
Yeah, all of that I agree with, and I try and stay out of this British American argument to some degree, because I think there are many good Americans still. And when I talk about America being a bad place, I'm speaking about the government, not their people. I think we've got to make that clear. And in the same way, when Americans talk about Britain, they should make it clear they're talking about a poodle government under Indian banker Rishi Sunak, not the people of Britain, which are not the same thing at all. And I think that's true of both countries.
Well, it can depend. I mean, you have plenty of people in Britain, for example, who will just subscribe to the political norm and they'll make your life hell if you step out of line. For example, let's say an American were to come over here and he was like a guy of our circles.
Mm-hmm.
The normies are like the shitlib phenotype lot. They will just make that guy's life hell. And the normies won't really do much because they're not politically active. Like, that's just the way things are. It's like the same with, I don't know. It's like, for example, you get, I don't know, you get these Eastern European shitlibs who complain all the damn time about, the Eastern Europeans are so racist, they're so sexist and homophobic. And it's just like, and when we go to detail and my attitude, it's basically just stuff we find normal. But because the society largely subscribes to the norms, that's carried on by an active right-wing element. It just permeates the society totally. And all these shitlibs just feel the need to bugger off to London, where they just poison our world even further.
I don't know. Look, whenever I see anyone saying someone is sexist or racist, I immediately think that person is not my friend. As soon as
Yeah.
I see those terms, like that person's not my friend. If they're using those lefty liberal phrases, they're not my friend. So I don't care. I'll just go, okay, you're my enemy then. And I think that's what we've got to start to do, because anyone on the supposed right who uses those phrases is not a right winger. They're just not, because racism, sexism, they're all lefty phrases.
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
yeah, go on.
sorry. So, I was just going to say, I can't remember who came up with the idea, but someone came up with the idea of using the word xenophile as an insult for these sort of people. Like, these people simp so much for foreigners over us that you might as well just call them xenophiles, and that word apparently should stick because it sounds very close to the word paedophile, of course. So I don't know what you make of that.
It's interesting. Controlling language is the most important thing, because it controls the thought process of normies.
Yeah, I mean, and that also speaks to sort of the innate ability of any genuine right movement, is that despite having such a limited communications potential, we can often meme all sorts of things into very close to public discourse. I'm not going to say a lot of it's gone complete mainstream, but a lot of phraseology and memes from the right do get permeated quite far and wide for the limit of our actual communication ability.
Well, I mean, also, Adam, and to be fair, the right spends far too much time arguing amongst ourselves about relatively minor bullshit, which really doesn't matter. I would also say that's true. But yeah, I do. Friend enemy distinction, guys. I mean, let's look at this. And I get that sometimes on the right you get confused because there are people who are slightly right of center who will never go any further. And I get that, and it's not good enough. But my deal is most of the arguments you get on the right are within various factions of the right who are arguing about stuff that doesn't matter so long as we have no power, which is where we are now. Like if you are a radical Christian on the right, and you might be a radical Christian of one of several different faiths, and they all argue, doesn't really matter if you're a radical right winger who is in favor of religions before Christianity. Doesn't bloody matter at the moment. That if we ever get any political power, yeah, all right, then you can sort that out. But at the moment, it's just nonsense, and it's arguing for the sake of arguing.
I mean, I don't see much argument between the Christian sects, but at the same time, is it Edward Dutton who used to say that if you want to become a leader of the right, you need to become like a master at herding cats? Everyone on the right is very, very free-spirited.
Yeah, 100%, and I totally agree with that. And that doesn't help our cause. It just doesn't, because the left just falls into line all the time. And as AA says correctly, and not everything AA says is correct, but this is correct, an organized body will always defeat an unorganized body.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to... No, sorry, go on, Mitch.
I don't know if you saw Walsh versus that... what's that woman on the Young Turks? What's her name? Summer Kasparian.
Anna,
Yeah. The one that Prescott was saying was cute for quite a long time. Yes, I remember that.
Oh God!
I mean, for an ethnic shit.
Look, she's not ugly. I'll give her that. Give him that. But
yeah, I mean, you got Walsh and her just conflicting over Kasparian actually going to debate Ben Shapiro. So the left aren't exactly as homogenous as you might think. Like they will fight each other. The thing is, someone like Blair comes along and pushes out all the crazies, and that's how the left gets its facade of like unity. Because someone like Blair comes along and he says, "Okay, keep up the tranny behind the curtain until we're in power. Then you can do it, or just wait until a given time." When our cultural revolution has permeated so much that there's not really much of a systemic opposition to it, then we can just afford to go crazy on it.
I'm sorry, Mitch. Are you suggesting that Ben Shapiro is on the right?
Somewhat on the right, but not really.
He's not on the right. He's a neocon. Leaving out all religious stuff, he's a neocon.
I'm just going to say, if he was on the political compass, he barely reached beyond half a square on the right, to be honest.
I don't think he'd reach on the right at all. I think he'd be slightly on the left, but that's just me. Because he's a neocon, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, on the domestic stuff, he's like all anti-abortion and all this, but but he's all like, but he's a lot more nationalistic towards Israel than for America. For
100%,
reasons.
100%. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely, I don't disagree with that at all. But I wouldn't call him a right-wing figure at all. There are figures in Britain who are quite big, supposedly, on the right on YouTube, for example, although they're always very careful what they say. And these guys are just gatekeepers, basically. They're trying to make sure that you think Maloney is actually far right. And anyone who is trying to pretend that Maloney is far right is not my friend.
Yeah, it's like I don't really know what the Italian quote-unquote far right are doing, because I heard of Casa Pound, who dissolved as a party and just focused on like when it was like a youth hostel, I believe, or something. But like, they're massive Mussolini fanboys, so and you'll get interviews.
But let's remember, Mussolini himself was not really all that right wing, and Mussolini himself was not all that extreme. Like Jewish people, for example, were totally safe in Mussolini's Italy until Germany took it over. And many Jewish people were actually supporters of the Italian fascist party.
Like I was going to say, but that's the thing is, you have like Casa Pound. They're the only exit I know of. Other than that, all the right-wing parties like Salvini and Maloney, they're pretty much just either too model or too cooked to really do what needs to be done. But then again, you got Furious Pertinax. I mean, he's one of the guys who, he reckons that Italy's going to save itself. So if he's got faith in Italy,
I hope he's right. I like Furious. I think he's a nice dude, and he's certainly an excellent military historian. But I hope he's right about Italy, actually.
Well, I follow his Twitter, obviously. So, he knows a lot more than me. So if he's got faith in Italy, then I suppose I will.
I'm sorry. What did you say, Alan?
I was just saying I can well believe it, actually. I don't know. Italy's still got a certain. Someone once talked about how on this stream about how a lot of these med countries still have a certain amount of machismo, and Italy's definitely still got that.
Yeah, I saw a Guardian article like last week where they were seething about this sort of anti-feminist book published in Spain, popular with young women, and he was pretty much just encouraging young women to just become housewives. I'll fish it if I can find it.
I may or may not have once gone on a rather unintentional pilgrimage to Mussolini's tomb, and there was actually a small queue of people all laying flowers down there, so it kind of surprised me.
I would just like to say that Jay in the chat has made the point that Semiagog and Pete Quinones' recent stream on American questions was very good. I watched that stream, and I am going to do a stream in reply to it, because I don't think look, I like Semiagog. I think he's a really good dude, and I think he's quite a deep thinking dude. But I don't think he's entirely right about the British Empire being the acorn to the gay American empire's oak. I don't think he's right about that.
I mean,
nor do I think that everyone from all the powerful guys moved from London to New York in about 1946.
Well, you think about it, both the British and American empires run on liberalism. It's just the British Empire gets a more positive rep amongst us because it was an early stage of liberalism, which is more tolerable compared to the stage of liberalism we're at now, where America is just a great Satan. But I mean, back in like the Victorian era, we were still sending the West Africa Squadron to rescue blacks, and we got no.
Yeah, sure, we were, but that is not the same as turning your own children into transgender people.
That's the thing.
Or allowing gay marriage, or all sorts of things that happens today. None of that was happening in the British Empire. And also Semiagog was incorrect because he went on about the British Empire spread women's voting. No, it didn't, because women were not allowed to vote at all in Britain until after World War I. And even then they had to be 30 and married to a householder. And it was not until 1928 that all women over 21 got the vote in Britain. So the idea that Britain, rather than America or other nations, spread female voting is just bullshit. It's not true. Britain was one of the last countries to allow female voting.
I mean, the thing is, like, both empires were run on the principle of liberalism, really, when you think about it. So we just happen to have our empire at a stage of liberalism where it's more tolerable, where we're not so insufferable, compared to nowadays of America, where about the late stage of liberalism and with all this tranny shit, like you get, for example, Ukraine practically being a satrapy of the American Empire with our bloody troon in Kiev these days.
Yep.
Just acting as a spokes. I don't even want to call it a person.
Spokes thing. I'd call it a spokes thing myself.
Yeah. So that's my point, is just look, at the end of the day, both empires are run on liberalism. It's just the Americans give a bad rep these days because they get the end stage of liberalism, which we get now.
So what you're saying then, Mitch, is that like there's no way to stop this ever. You can't go down that route at all. Is that what you're saying?
Can't go do what with liberalism? Because I mean,
any sort of liberalism, you can't go down the route of like reducing the hours of workers' work, or you can't go anywhere down that route. Because, like, to me, the British Empire back in the day, and I'm talking about in the late 19th century principally, was okay. I have no problem with what he wanted to do and what he was doing. What's happening today is an enormous difference.
But the thing is, like, oh yeah, John Stuart Mill. Oh yeah, his liberalism might be more conservative.
No, I didn't like George. No, hang on. John Stuart Mill's not one of my. I don't like him at all. All right.
Okay, sure, but you're saying that we
should. But he was a pre-extreme. He was a pre-extreme liberal. In his day.
The thing is, like, why should we put ourselves on a path of liberalism? Because it inevitably ends up where we are now. At the end of the day.
That's what I'm saying. Do you think it does inevitably end up where we are now?
Yeah, because liberalism literally just shields the idea of blank slate that we're not really innately born with anything. It's just everything's a blank slate.
See, I don't think most British dudes in the 19th century, and let me be clear, I'm talking about the 19th century here, not the 20th. I don't think most British dudes thought that at all. I think they thought that there were certain educated Anglo-Celtic people who could do this stuff. And that's as far as it went, really.
But the idea was the rest of the world would then be educated after that. there'd be a
Yeah,
period.
yeah. They wanted to bring it up, but did they think it would come up
wouldn't you
to
call
the
that
same
liberalism?
level? Yeah, but did they think, Mr. Streets, that it would come up to the same level? I don't think they did, to be honest.
Well, what about the Victorian idea of progress? What's your view on that? Because in my understanding, the idea was, yes, it would be led by a sort of benevolent British Empire at the beginning, but the ultimate goal would be to spread. Like, there's the fundamental assumption is everything we've built can be taught to the other people of the world, and eventually it can all be the same political development as Britain.
All right, Mr. Streets, to understand my position, you've got to realize I'm a supporter of Disraeli and Lord Salisbury. I am most certainly not a supporter of Gladstone. All right? I think Gladstone was totally wrong. If you were going to say to me, yeah, that's what Gladstone thought, yeah, I'd agree with you, but I detest Gladstone. Just like I detest Winston Churchill, who went from the Conservatives to the Liberals.
Mitch, where do you think liberalism started? Would it be the Great Reform Act or the Civil War, or?
I mean, what's his name now? Locke is generally put down by Sargon as like the starting point of liberalism. I'd argue that.
Surely it was the American and then the French Revolution that was the start of liberalism.
Well, I have a counterpoint to that. Actually, I've been meaning to bring it up. I'm not sure you could call this political liberalism because there's a little bit of geopolitics. But what about the consistent, multi-century long actions of the British government to sort of, you'd have these colonists and expansionary people chomping at the bit to go into the bright sunlit uplands of all these places around the world, and the British would consistently block settlers moving into these areas. Specifically, I'm thinking about 1763. The what was it called? That they had that line where they stopped American colonists going into Indian territory, and it was one of the causes of the American Revolution. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, and reining in all these people. Compare that to, say, like the Spanish Empire, which didn't have an ounce of liberalism in it. They're like, okay, yeah, conquistador, yeah, you've got 12 guys. Yeah,
how well were those two empires doing 100 years later?
But I think the Spanish Empire was broken up by Britain in the same way that Britain was broken up by America. Funding fake.
You're talking about the South American, the Latin American wars of independence in the early 80s.
Yes.
Maybe. Yeah, you may have a point there. Maybe. But again, I'm not a liberal. All right, I'm not a liberal or a Whig. I would have been a Tory and then a Conservative back in the day when that meant anything. But Britain did have loads, absolutely, of Whig and Liberal governments. I mean, to this day, the only 19th century politician in Britain who gets a good rap from modern history books is Gladstone, who was a scumbag, basically.
I mean, the only thing I know about Gladstone that I like about him is he wanted to smash up the Ottoman Empire after what they did to Bulgaria.
Yeah, but that's your pro-Russianism showing, Mitch, with all due respect.
Well, it's not just that.
Whereas from Britain's point of view, Britain's support of the Ottoman Empire was basically to keep Russia and the Russian Navy out of the Med, which I think was perfectly valid as a British point of view. In those days.
I wouldn't have cared if the Russian Navy got a chance in the Med. Like, I'm thinking, I just don't.
You would have done it if you were a patriotic Brit, though.
My patriotism for Britain extends to me hating Turks, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, well, so you would have got on great with Gladstone, but Gladstone was absolutely the most liberal of liberals.
That's why I otherwise largely dislike him, because I mean, for example, he was one of these free trade fundamentalists, but I mean, If he went on a ticket of let's smash the Ottoman Empire, then I would have voted for him back in like 1880 or whatever.
Yeah. Although I would say that now I agree. I would have been against the Crimean War at the time, but being friends with the Ottoman Empire, we squeezed out a lot more than what we potentially would have at war. I think of what we got. We got Cyprus. We got basically the entire.
Cyprus was 1877, the Congress of Berlin.
Precisely, but that was being the friends of the Ottomans and saying, look, we're saving you from Russians diplomatically. But
give us this pretty island, which we will keep forever.
Yeah, exactly, right.
We still have two enormous crown bases there, which I know guys who've served there. But yeah.
Well, we've had that. Well, look, Richard the Lionheart had Cyprus as well, so we've got a very long tradition of owning Cyprus.
100%. 100%.
And on top of that, we basically took control of the Ottoman treasury, just like we took control of the empire of the Qing treasury and most of the civil service there.
Oh yeah, the Brits ran the Chinese customs service pretty much.
You know,
and although Atterman has a lot of interesting things to say about the so-called Opium Wars, which weren't really.
Right.
Yeah, broadly more to do with silver, tea, especially silver than opium. Didn't have. I think the actual treaty at the time, which was admittedly written by us, but it doesn't mention opium in it once, which it was obviously not going to mention it much. But yeah, it was a lot to do with the because they were taxed in silver in China, but obviously then had their own local denominated currencies, and because of certain international things at the time, the value of silver was climbing quite high, and that they just weren't able to collect anywhere near as much tax. People just weren't paying it because the difference was too much, and they wanted to find someone to blame it on. And we absolutely were selling opium there, but we sold opium in lots of other places too, including back in Britain, and it didn't have much of an effect. And I think they wanted to capture ship in the action of doing it, and then be able to point a finger, but instead they just boarded a regular ship that was, I think, full of tea, and caused an international incident.
Do you know how he got the name Opium Wars in that case? Because I always assumed it was a contemporary name, but is that later or?
Yeah, I believe. I think it pops up in a few places, but it's quite a long time afterwards, and I think it was really heavily popularized under that name in the during the Maoist period. I think they were trying to sort of conduct some historical revisionism about Chinese past, about how they'd always been kept back and held down and such.
100%, and it was under Chairman Mao. And wasn't the ship you were talking about the Arrow?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. That didn't have any opium on it at all. It was just a British flag ship.
Mm.
Really?
And wasn't it the Duke of Wellington as well that really kicked off the most about the Chinese boarding one of our ships?
Yep. And Britain, let's be fair, Britain was really, really strict about that all over the world, not just in China. Like, if you boarded a British merchant ship for no reason, the Royal Navy were going to come after you unless you had a bloody good reason to do it.
Mm. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I always found that. I was always so skeptical about the opium wars because it's so out of character, to be honest.
Mm.
If the actual drug dealing story is legit.
It was vastly exaggerated, as Atterman, I'm sure, just explained. So yeah, it was very, very much exaggerated.
Interesting. I was under the impression that there was an element of that, but that element was on behalf of the Sassoon family who funded the expedition.
There were certain traders who wanted to do that. Yeah, there were. But what Britain really wanted was like free trade within China. That was the main British aim. It wasn't to sell opium. Some British independent traders wanted to do that for sure. But the idea that we fought a war to sell opium to the Chinese just bloody lie.
And it would have just been unnecessary as well. We wouldn't have needed to go to those
No.
lengths to do that.
We could have done that without fighting any bloody wars. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Does anyone know why Japan was opened up by the Americans in 1854 rather than us?
Well, we helped not long afterwards. Like the Royal Navy fought a battle in the 1860s against some samurai warlord, and the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines landed and captured a lot of their batteries.
Really?
So it wasn't just the Americans; it was just the Americans got there first.
Yeah, wasn't it like the Japanese Navy were massive Anglophiles as well? Because I mean, to be fair, everyone's Navy.
They became massive Anglophiles because eventually the Imperial Japanese Navy was modelled on the British Royal Navy, and Japanese officers were allowed to go to British Royal Navy colleges and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure, but like, I remember reading up on like emperors like Hirohito and his brother Chichibu, who massive Anglophiles for those pair were. Like, for example, Hirohito would always have a full English every morning without fail, while Chichibu sponsored rugby in like interwar Japan. Then you have like Emperor Meiji, I believe. A lot of elites around his
He was the
massive
guy
Anglophiles.
he was the big dude who like took Japan back over as he was the emperor who once again became, in theory, the ruler of Japan. Yeah, Meiji.
Yeah, because the thing was, the Tokugawa shogunate who were basically like kind of like generalissimos, and they went against the emperor on the topic of westernizing Japan. They had this civil war called the Bolshevic War, where the emperor won, and then not long after, like 10 years after, they had a Samurai rebellion, where Japan had that sense of, okay, you know, that last samurai film with Tom Cruise, where it's
which is full of bullshit. Which is full of bullshit about the Americans, by the way. But
yeah, sure, but like, the whole arching message of the film being, okay, Japan must westernize because they didn't want to be like China and you know, just
100%.
have unequal treaties. But then they had kept on clinging onto their traditions to the point where, you know, you and I will admire Japan for clinging onto traditions even amidst like a globalized world. So
100%. But I mean, what that movie, The Last Samurai, gets wrong is that the Japanese Navy first went with the French, but not for long, and then quickly realized the Royal Navy was the best navy, so they went with the Royal Navy. And if you go today to see the flagship of the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Tsushima, where they destroyed the second Russian Pacific Squadron, which I know you all know about, Mitch. If you go and see that battleship, which is still preserved in Japan, it's a British-built battleship. It's the only British-built pre-dreadnought before 1904.
Yeah, the Battle of Tsushima was so the original Pacific fleet got smashed by the Japanese early on. So then they had to steam, I think, the Baltic fleet
all the way from the Baltic, some from the Black Sea Fleet as well, but mostly from the Baltic. Yeah, and they sailed all the way around the world, only to get sunk by the Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, there was nearly a war between Britain and Russia because there was a naval incident where a Russian ship fired on a bunch of British fishermen. And the Russians refused to apologise for it whatsoever.
Yeah, this was in the days of the Anglo-Japanese naval treaty, and there's a stream on that on this channel you can see with Rupert August, by the way. But yeah, the Anglo-Japanese naval treaty went from 1902 to 1922. And Britain and Japan were good mates. And Japan was a very good ally to Britain. But at the time of the Washington Naval Treaty after World War I, which was aimed at making America the world's number one naval power, it had to be got rid of because the Americans didn't like it, surprisingly enough. the Japanese Navy was absolutely based on the Royal Navy, and the Japanese Army was initially based on the French Army, but fairly quickly shifted over to being based on the German Army.
Yeah, I think it was like just after the Franco-Prussian War, where Japan just saw France get practically wrecked really hard by the Germans, and just thought, yeah, we're going to go with a stronger horse in this one. So can't blame him.
Biaki is saying in the chat, best Japanese films by Takeshi Kitano, mate. I know of at least one good Japanese film, which is about the Russo-Japanese War, and actually is a pretty good movie. And it kind of shows the Japanese attacks pretty accurately, because the 1904 war between Japan and Russia very much foreshadowed World War One. You know, like loads of artillery, trenches, machine guns, barbed wire. All of this stuff happened in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. So, yeah, well worth having a look at.
Yeah, it's interesting. Japan had a reputation for isolationism, but actually Korea was way more stringent. Yeah.
I can well believe that. I can well believe that.
It's
All right,
almost
guys,
like-
we sorry, carry on, Mr. Streets.
I was going to say, almost like the North Koreans are continuing a tradition of being isolated. Yeah.
Probably true. Probably true. Look, guys, we've gone over 2 hours. I just think we should do final thoughts, and then I'll ask any of you if there's anything you want to share. Final thoughts, guys. Mitch.
I mean, on topic of like Africa, I mean, Morgoth's law will come into operation. If there's a war, we're just going to get loads of African immigrants, especially when you consider Niger has the highest birth rate in the world. So there's that to keep in mind.
Yeah, don't disagree at all. Don't disagree at all. Mr. Streets, any final thoughts?
Yeah, let me see if there's anything in chat. Marco Pierre White aren't anywhere near. I don't know what that means. Yeah, great stream. Lots of topics covered. We've probably gone the majority of. I think we went on every continent this stream, so not bad.
Yeah, pretty much. Got there. But then the British Empire was the empire on which the sun never set. So there we go.
Oh yeah, Alice Little. She corrects me. Yeah, it was the Proclamation line of 1763, and that stopped the settlers, across America.
Yep.
I remember reading that when I was a teenager, and I thought it was cringe then, but I didn't know why, right?
Yeah, I know. It's the Brits trying to protect their local inhabitants. I've got a couple of streams with Chris Card, and I'm hoping to do a third when he eventually stops spending most of his time being a dad, on like early Australian settlement. And the same thing happened in Australia. Like the Brits were really strict on don't kill the Aboriginal dudes. They really were quite strict on that. Alice Little, I will check your entropy at the end of this stream, as I always do. Adam, any final thoughts, mate?
No, nothing from me. We have covered a lot of subjects tonight. It's hard to keep track of all of them, to be honest.
Yeah, that's cool though. We're intelligent Western Anglo-Celtic men. We can do that. We can do such things. So yeah. Absolutely. Anything anyone would like to shill?
No, nothing from me.
I will shill on Atman's behalf. His what's it called?
Bowder Bomber.
Bowden Bomber. I will absolutely shill Atman's Bowden Bomber stream.
Yeah, I need to make some more shorts for that, to be honest, or more videos.
You should. It's good. I mean, have you even got clear amount? I'm not even sure if you have. That one needs to be added for a start.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, do go and check out Baden Bomber. It's a good channel on YouTube. Anything you wanted to show, Mr. Streets?
No, it's interesting. I mean, unless anyone in the chat wants to seize control of a company, because I do that professionally.
Jesus,
DM me if you want.
I'll be in touch
Yeah.
with you after the stream, mate. But yeah,
I know, right? So yeah, DM me if you want. If you've got any companies to buy, I'll help you out with that. But other than that, don't worry about it.
yeah. Wait for after the stream, mate. I'll be touching immediately. Mitch, anything you wanted to show?
No, not for me.
All right, then. No worries. Mitch actually has a good Twitter channel you should follow, which is it's pro-Russian, but like it's no more pro-Russian than I am. So yeah.
Well, it's not just talking about. I just spoke about Old English versus modern English. So if you're patient with autism, then I suppose you can come on down to my Twitter.
Yeah, no, all right. I need to explain this to the guys in the chat. Mitch speaks quite a few languages, and he's in favor of Old English rather than modern English. And Old English was simpler and had more logical spelling. Absolutely, it did. So I kind of get where he's coming from on that one.
Interesting.
But yeah, but it did. I mean, but it didn't have two words for everything like English does. It didn't have pork and pig, lamb and sheep, beef and cows, that kind of stuff.
Do you have any opinion on dialects, mate?
I like them. I like them. I don't know what Mitch thinks, but I like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll study the northern ones more, but that's because they're close. I mean, it's like you have Bern, which, because I mean, the Swedish say born to say child, so I'm interested in that. It's like, if I study German, for example, knowing all the English dialects generally tends to help you along with associating words in your head.
So the northern dialect of Old English is closer to Norse than the other, or is that?
Yeah, it's especially like Yorkshire, Newcastle, and Lincolnshire way. Then you get where I'm from in Black Country, where it feels like more Anglo-Saxon. Like like where I'm from, you say "Hey bist," not "How are you," which because German will say "Wie bist du," like to say "How are you," and so on.
Mitch, could I mention the thing you put up in the Discord not long ago, where there was a Dutch guy. A Dutch girl and a German girl speaking in their own languages, and 2/3 of it, any English person would understand. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I can you get this whole idea of English being a Latin language, but then I listen to French and I can't understand much of it. I mean, you get very intellectual words, like you get the word like signature, or I don't know, installation or whatever, but really basic stuff that you use every day, like you're talking about the weather or whatever. Yeah, French just isn't really that close to English.
It's a Latin language. Absolutely, it is. I mean, like you, Mitch, I'd say you've got a not particularly strong Birmingham accent, but not all that strong.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I've got, for example, a grandfather on my mum's side who was a Cockney, so I've got some. Like sometimes I'll say, I don't Adam and Eve this, for example, or I just sound like, or sound like Del Boy from Only Fools and Horses at times. Then I got a nan who came from Yorkshire, so then I'll use some Yorkshire words sometimes. So it's like, I suppose my accent and dialects is a bit more. Don't want to say melting pot, but you get my point.
But that's the sort of diversity I can absolutely stand behind. I love all the different accents in England and Britain. I think they're great.
Yeah, that's a bit of a gets me. If I was like, you take, for example, I don't know, like France doesn't really have accents anymore. despite being a bigger country than us.
It was
But we're a small
wiped
country.
out by the French Revolution and then Napoleon, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. Because the French have some really autistic desire to just centralize everything, which is why you have a Breton language, which is just dying out because the French government doesn't give a damn, and the people just have no will to preserve it. So, well, some people do have a will to preserve it, but you get point. It's like without government funding and government protections, it's just going to die out. So it's a shame on that one.
I love like that you've got. Originally, I had a Cockney accent, which I've lost, I hope, to a large degree. But I still have a bit of it for sure. You've got Cornish and Devon accents. You've got someone like from the Midlands, like Mitch, and then you'll have Yorkshire accents, and then you'll have people like Geordies and Mackhams in the northwest. Northeast. And then obviously you got like Glasgow accents, and that's totally different to a Edinburgh accent, and that's totally different to a Highland accent. And then of course you got Welsh people, Northern Irish people. I love the huge diversity of accents, like in traditional Britain, and that's what I support. I think that's great. That's a diversity that I think is our strength.
Yeah, I just find it weird how, like, we're smallish island. Yeah, we have so many accents, but then you get bigger countries than us who pretty much have no distinct accents and dialects from one another. It's all the same. I mean, Italy, for example, is well known for like being as diverse as England for amount of accents and dialects, to the point where someone from Sicily can't understand someone from Milan, and so.
Yeah, no, 100%, Mitch. I'd love to get what's his name, the Australian Italian dude who we have.
Furious.
Yeah, I'd love to get Furious on one day, talking about the difference between Northern Italian, Roman, Sicilian, and even accents from like what's it called, Napoli. I'd love to talk to him about that, because, as you say, Italy is another place which is a peninsula rather than an island, but it has so many accents in quite a small area, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what. I mean, I know, like, apparently with I think it's Russia, where despite their country being so massive, like everyone speaks the same Russian. Like, everyone speaks standard Russian, and there's not really much of an accent or dialect difference. Like, fair enough, you can tell the difference in like a Western Ukrainian and Eastern Ukrainian, but someone from St. Petersburg can travel all the way to like Vladivostok and have no difficulties whatsoever because they all sound the same. Like, they don't really have distinct dialects.
Mitch, hold that thought for a minute, or keep talking about it, because I have to go to the loo. I'll be back in 5 seconds, because I do want to talk about this, and specifically about Russian accents, actually.
Well, even outside of Russian borders, so like you'll have Russians in Riga or Donbass or Minsk, and it's the same dialect.
Yeah, things like the communists, like with the French Revolution, they just wanted to make everything centralized. So that, it's like, because you have like, I don't know, you'll have a country like Italy where they try to base everything on Florentine Italian, just because the most popular books in Italian all happen to be printed from Florence. But it's not really successful compared to how, in Russia, everyone speaks pretty much like a standard Muscovite form of Russian, because it's like you get all the major literature works which came from like everywhere, Moscow or St. Petersburg. Then you get modern English, which they reckon, like, because back in like Middle English time, before railways and roads and so on, you just had so many different accents and dialects, made it difficult for someone from North England, like Yorkshire way, to talk to someone from down like the southwest. And so we had to standardize it through Geoffrey, because Geoffrey Chaucer's work was generally seen as like the first medium of it, but Geoffrey Chaucer was from like Essex, so standard modern English has its roots in like Essex form of English, and then all the other accents and dialects just molded into following that standard, but still keeping their sense of differentiality. So,
Right. And that's in conjunction with the Norman elite speaking totally different language half the time. Do we have any data of like what was there any point where the elite began speaking English again?
Henry V, I believe, was the first to speak English natively. Richard the Lionheart, I think Iron Duke said, was the first to speak English as a second language. Because William the Conqueror actually wanted to learn more Old English to ingratiate himself with the people. But but the thing about Old English is it's really difficult grammatically wise. Like, I'm glad that at times we're not like Old English with grammatical gender, grammatical cases.
Richard the Lionheart was born and raised in England for his first, I can't remember if it was 5 or 7 years now. So he could certainly speak English because like his nurses and stuff and nannies had spoken English, as you rightly say, Mitch. And Henry V was the first, well, actually his father was the first king who was English first speaker.
Really? What about the Edwards, like Longshanks?
No, they spoke. They did speak English, obviously, but it was not their first language.
Really interesting.
Yeah, that was their second language.
Yeah, then you get because I mean they reckon that like so with English, it was before the Normans came out. It was already in a state of tug of war between like the Norse influences and the original Old English Saxon words.
And English in Henry V's time was not exactly the same as English today by any means, as I'm sure Mitch would agree.
Well, yeah, it's apparently if you can read Geoffrey Chaucer's work, Dutch will be a walk in the park, from what I've heard. Like a Dutchman I knew off Discord, oddly enough, he says he can read Geoffrey Chaucer no problem, and he says if any one of us, as an Englishman, were able to read Geoffrey Chaucer fluently without any chance of difficulty, then learning Dutch, for example, or learning German for that matter, would be a simple walk in the park because, 1400 versus nowadays, there's a lot more Latin and French words in our language today than there was 600 years ago.
Interesting. There's no way, I don't think they'll have any evidence on this, but do we have any signs that the Danelaw had any influence on the language, or was it Norse before? Or you see what I mean?
They reckon that, as I said, like because you have the word to take. The original word in Old English was niman, from which we get the word nimble these days, and you got the German word nemen, which means to take. But we replaced that word with take, which came from Norse. So like the really basic words you use in every day, words like egg, berserk, the word they. Word like pronoun they and them also comes from our Norse. Like it's reckoned that even if we weren't invaded by the Normans, English would still become what it is like today with like no grammatical gender, no cases, massively simplified grammar because you've got Old English and Old Norse where they can communicate basically, but because the grammar is so different between them, they would have had to simplify English for the sake of communicating between like the Norse mixed people in the north with the Old English speaking people like where I'm from, who had to trade with people from the north and so on. So,
Mitch, would it be fair to say that like the north east of England, I think that's been quite heavily influenced by Norse in terms of its accent and also the way that the people speak there? Do you think that would be fair?
Yeah, I've heard of a story of like a Yorkshireman who he had a really thick Yorkshire accent. He wanted to move over to Denmark to work there. Spoke in his thick Yorkshire accent without learning a word of Danish. He could speak with the Danes and he could understand them and them to him back. No problem whatsoever because apparently the Yorkshire dialect and the Danish language are similar enough that they can actually understand each other fairly well.
But I've also noticed that like, Geordies and Mackems, even the sound of their speech is a bit Nordic, I'd say. A bit Scandinavian.
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, I mean, to be fair, there's like because there's a linguistic theory called crowd murmur, which basically, so if you get a crowd of Englishmen together and you just get them to speak English to one another, a Spaniard will then, let's say they just heard a crowd of Norwegians speak to one another, and then they hear a bunch of Englishmen speak to one another. They'll think that the English and Norwegians are basically speaking dialects of the same language, because the languages are that similar in the eyes of a Spaniard who otherwise does not know.
See, I think this is why there are so many local accents in the UK, because Cornwall, for example, was always basically Celtic, like at least the south of Cornwall was. But then you had very large areas which were Anglo-Saxon. Then you had some areas which were Danelaw, like the northeast, for example. And the same thing more or less happened in Scotland as well. And then, of course, you've got areas like Wales, which again is basically Celtic. And then, of course, in Ireland, you've got like Celts and also Anglo-Scots who moved over there in different times. And this is why Britain ended up with so many brilliant different local dialects and accents.
Yeah, I'd say with Cornwall, I mean, we reckon that people only really spoke English as like a majority everyday usage in like the 1600s. So we conquered them back in like 900s under Alfred the Great, but then it took like 700 years for them to adopt English as like their main language, because Cornish was so firmly rooted in the area.
Well, didn't they revolt against Elizabeth as well, the Cornish, or Henry VIII or something like that?
Believe so, yeah. Because
maybe Henry VIII, not Elizabeth, but Henry VIII, yeah.
Right.
But then a lot of people revolted against Henry VIII because he was trying to change the country's religion.
Yeah.
But not against Elizabeth. No, they didn't.
Right.
They were very loyal during the Spanish Armada and all this kind of stuff.
But there were some Cornish rebellions in the 1500s.
Yeah, but under Henry, not Elizabeth.
Yeah, I believe it's something like because you had Wales, which under the Tudor era, they were pretty much legally annexed into the Kingdom of England, and
of course the Tudors were Welsh.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit weird. I mean the Tudors are a bit of a weird story, Matt. Like you have this low Welsh noble by the name of Tudor, who then has children with the widow of Edward II, I think. Oh no, not Edward II, Henry V.
Yeah.
They then have Edmund and Jasper, and I can't remember if it's Jasper from Edmund that you then get the Tudor dynasty as we know it with Henry VII onward. So
I mean, this is another thing about Britain is that after Elizabeth, the British king, the British monarchs become the Stuarts, who are Scottish. But prior to Elizabeth, she was the last of the Tudors, and the Tudors were Welsh. So, this idea that there's some sort of English domination of all these other people is just not true, basically.
On that note, though, I'm going to have to pop off. So I will talk to you later.
Thanks. Adam, you are always welcome on these streams, and you don't come on enough these days, but I'm glad you're busy and earning loads of money, so that's good.
Right, well, thanks for that. Yeah, good night, everyone. See you later.
Go on.
Cheers.
But yeah, the idea that England dominated everywhere is not true. I mean, we ended up with Welsh kings and queens, and then we ended up with Scottish kings and queens. And then we ended up with Dutch, German kings and queens. So, yeah, you have to look at this carefully. Vulture in the chat says that Orkney and Shetland spoke a Norse language till the 1800s. Now, all I can say about that, which is not much, is my old man had a mate from the Orkneys when I was a kid, and he was a very soft-spoken guy, and he was really nice. So yeah, that's all I can say about that.
Yeah. One of my good friends, the family's from the Shetlands, and their accent's very thick when they get drunk or when they're finding something very funny. Then the accent really comes out. But all the men in the family are like 6'5", Vikings. So,
Yeah. My dad's mate was like 6'3" or something like that.
Incredible,
Huge bloke, but really soft spoken. And like I was a little kid, I was like 7 or 8 at the time. My younger brother would have been 5, and he was always very, very nice to us. So really nice bloke, really nice bloke.
Yeah, isn't it something like in the Orkney Islands or something like where they have like pretty much because they got like at least 25% Norwegian in them, so they have to like learn Norwegian or they will know Norwegian as a second language anyway. So that's probably why. I don't know, like, I mean, until about 1800s, I wouldn't be surprised about. I haven't really looked into it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's only the 1800s where they start speaking English first, then Norwegian second, because
I got no
been
idea,
for.
But it could be correct for sure.
I think the indigenous language of Shetland is Norn, isn't it? And it's basically very similar to Norwegian, right?
Yeah, it's like because you have Scots, which is basically like old. It's like English, but older. Like it's kept true to its old Saxon roots compared to modern English. And then you got Scots, which mixed with Norwegian in the area, and that just becomes like this really sort of interesting hybrid language. Or I don't know how you describe it.
It's definitely a Germanic language, but in Isle of Man, Manx is a Celtic language, right? Even though it was owned by the Norse for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's like the same with the Norse Gaels who they spoke Norse at first and then just integrated into the local fabric, and they just speak Gaelic languages these days. Same with the Norse who would have a Manx, where they just mix with the locals and then just integrated with them to the point where there's no difference. So you get Iceland, for example, where the people are as Anglo-Saxon as they are Scandinavian in that area, as well as Irish. So it's like a really, yeah.
Iceland. Yeah, I've been to Iceland. Yeah, that's true. Really nice people. Don't go to Iceland if you drink alcohol. It's like in the 1980s, a bottle of red wine would cost you about £20. In the 1980s, don't do it. It's horrible. But it's a lovely place and very interesting. But yeah, I do believe that Mitch is right. That if you look into the DNA of Icelanders, there's quite a lot of Irish and British, although that might to some degree like reflect slaves who were taken by the Vikings back in the day.
Interesting. There's also a lot of wasn't there Irish monks who wanted to go as far away from civilization as they could?
Well, you mean the guys on what's it called? The famous island that the Vikings raided several times, killed everyone.
Lindisfarne. No.
Lindisfarne,
yeah, something like that. And I'm sure some of them went all the way to Iceland, or there's like a theory they went to Iceland in the 8th century. I'm not sure. I'll check it out.
Could be. I don't know, to be honest.
Not in big enough numbers.
The modern Icelandic people are lovely, but as I say, if you drink alcohol, don't go there because I dread to think what a bottle of red wine would cost you there now.
Yeah.
Well,
if you like alcohol and want somewhere cheap, the city should be Danzig.
Really?
So the Poles, it's all German beer, Bavarian beer, and all this stuff, but it's Polish prices. And I'll tell you what, a topic for another stream is how well the communist countries after the war rebuilt all these medieval cities perfectly and restored them with actually great historical respect.
that would be interesting. That would be interesting, for sure.
Yeah, it's like I know like Warsaw, I mean, it got completely smashed by the Germans in the Warsaw Uprising. Then after the war, the old city just gets completely rebuilt to reflect its old heritage.
Absolutely.
Whereas,
I
when you have like Romania,
I don't agree with Wiggles in the chat here, by the way, because I've seen them. Northern Lights are not rubbish in person. Sorry, I've seen them. They're not. They're pretty spectacular.
But even places, Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I know with Romania, Transylvania is still pretty beautiful. Like, I'd visit there from what I've heard, because I know a Transylvanian Saxon who was born in Romania, and he generally just says, "Oh yeah, like Transylvania got pretty like rebuilt pretty well after the war," and like Ceausescu even. I mean, despite Ceausescu, they still didn't like demolish all the medieval heritage, unlike other areas of the country like Wallachia and Moldavia, which didn't escape so well from it all.
Yeah, Brasov is a Saxon city in Romania. Beautiful. And actually the Poles, by the way, not only Warsaw, but Breslau, which is now called Wrocław, I think. But they preserved the medieval, well, not preserved, they rebuilt all the medieval architecture. All the Teutonic fortresses of the Teutonic Order got rebuilt by the communists as well, like beautifully, even like the churches and the cathedrals. It's really remarkable. There's the fortress of Marienburg, which is enormous castle, enormous, and there's a cathedral inside the castle, and not a church, a cathedral. And they built it, and that was all under the Iron Curtain. So interesting.
Yeah, and all those former East Europeans, like the East Germans, etc. Hungarians, number one. The Poles, at least up until recently, were all the most right-wing Europeans. Yeah, amazingly enough. Tuma Arminius is suggesting North Africans are a highly compatible group with the British way of life, but I suspect he's taking the piss.
Yeah.
So I won't take him too seriously. Yeah. But yeah, it's funny that all those East European former communist dudes were the most right-wing people, and some of them, i.e. Hungary, still are. And to some degree, I would even say Russia, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, the Russian parliament has recently made it illegal for people under 18 to undergo any sort of turning them into trannies. That's been banned. And I think they've even banned gay marriage, haven't they?
I mean, it's always been banned. I mean, like, you got gay propaganda. They had like that law back in like early 2010s where they banned American families from adopting Russian children because there was a scandal where a homosexual couple over in America, they adopted a Russian lad and
I remember
did unspeakable things.
Yeah, I remember that.
I thought it was called the Magnitsky Act. Now I'm thinking of something else. I can't remember the name of the act with Duma's side, but it was like early 2010s, and Putin got a lot of negative coverage off the US mainstream media for it, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, if countries are going to ban turning kids into trannies, totally support that. If they're going to ban gay marriage, I totally support that. So, you look at these. On the one hand, you have the Western, in air quotes, elites trying to tell us that Russia is terrible and it's still the USSR and all the rest of it. Whereas on the other hand, everything I actually see coming out of Russia, Russia's more right-wing and based and supporting families than anyone in Britain or America is.
Yeah, it's like, did you see that bloody video on Twitter where it was like this Ukrainian guy, he beaten up some tranny in the middle of the Lvov. Then what happened was he had to apologize on camera to said tranny.
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
Is that the one where he's like, hey, you don't understand, my whole family was part of the SS, so I'm learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Biaki in the chat points out What do you think Tolkien would have thought about Beowulf slander? Was Tolkien not English enough for you? Tolkien wrote a long review of Beowulf, which is available online. Do go and check it out. And Tolkien loved it. He really liked it.
I'm going to start reading it on Monday. So I'll be starting that. Probably talk about it next week if I complete it.
Mitch, you should do a stream on it yourself, mate. Really, you should. But yeah, but Tolkien loved Beowulf and did a very long, like, I don't know, 30, 40 page review of it, talking about it. And he loved it because Beowulf is one of the earliest English literary things that there is.
Yeah, I mean, you have like the trope of like the whole, like, because you get Beowulf, who I'm pretty sure he's a Dane who travels to the land of the Geats, because this is a common trope in Germanic myths. Is that you get a guy from one tribe who then travels to help another tribe. So they reckon that inspired Bilbo.
But it's an English story based in England originally.
But I mean, because the thing was that the Anglo-Saxons at the time, because you can't think that Sutton Hoo helmet that was forged in Sweden.
Oh yeah,
still had a lot of, yeah. So we still had a lot of extensive trade links with the likes of the Scandinavians and Northern Germans. So you have you'll have like folk tales of, for example, you got Finland, where their first Christian bishop was an Englishman by the name of Henry. And he got martyred by this Finnish guy called Lally, who killed him with an axe. So that's one area, for example, where another country has a part of their myths or legends about a guy not from their country. So Beowulf being a Dane, or Bishop Henry who converted Finland, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, I think Victor Claros has this correct, but it is one of the earliest English literary writings, and the reason Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings was because he believed that the Norman invasion of England had deprived England of most of its myths. And I think to a large degree he's correct about that. I mean, the only really real one we can look at is Robin Hood, really, which is an excellent myth, by the way, but it's almost the only one. So part of Tolkien's, part of the reason he wrote The Lord of the Rings was to replace this lost English myth. I think you do agree with me on that, but that's certainly what he was doing it for. Yeah, but Tolkien looked at Germanic, British, Anglo-Celtic, Scandinavian. He looked at those myths, and it also, to some degree, he looked at the Byzantines and the Romans, and he kind of made his Lord of the Rings stories out of all of that stuff. And he was a professor of Anglo-Saxon, for God's sake,
Yeah, it's, for example, you get the Hengist and Horta, who perhaps in an alternate world where Godwinson won, we'd have a lot more mythology and legends about those two, but we barely know anything about them, because probably the Normans destroyed a lot of the historical records or whatever, or just destroyed. I mean, to be fair, I wonder how much of it was passed down orally, like it was passed down like stories of a campfire,
or
written down. Yeah. So perhaps there's that as well. That the Normans, they changed the language. Well, I wouldn't say completely change the language, but like alter the language somewhat. They bring in some of their cultural norms, and it brings like this hybrid culture of like what we think of, what we know today, like the English. It generally just shakes up about identity. Then you have King Arthur, which was massively shunned by the Norman nobility to replace a lot of his Anglo-Saxon legends and mythology we had.
Yes, it was.
So
I have a problem with that because of that. Yeah, true. But I to me, the guy I'd go back to for English myths and legends would be Alfred the Great and his warriors. The only people in Europe to actually defeat the Norsemen. They were the only people who did.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I say so because you got to think the French, for example, they gave land away to them, hence Normandy and the Normans. You got the Russians who just assimilated them rather than beat them, which is not really the same thing.
Yeah.
Then you get Scotland and Ireland who suffered with them for really centuries
and got mixed.
Whereas England, like the Norse Gaels, or you get the Norse who created Dublin
as a slave trading port, by the way. That was what Dublin was started as a Norse slave trading port.
Yeah, and then you get so that's generally the Anglo-Saxons are really the only people to really hold the Norse at bay, whereas everyone else just you get I don't know.
Frithwolf makes a good point in the chat. The Anglo-Saxon poem The Wanderer, which I recently put up in the Discord, by the way, had a huge influence on Tolkien. He got the ring idea from it. Yeah, maybe he did. He might, because I know he did. He really did like The Wanderer, and that is like it's a totally of its time poem, because this is a warrior who has lost his lord. It's really good. Mitch, Mr. Streets, well, I don't know what you think about The Wanderer. I'm sure both of you would have read it.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of poetry, but The Wanderer is one example I'd set aside for that. But I do quite like. I think it was George who shilled it a long time ago, and so everyone came to just read it. But it's very relatable considering the situation we're in as men of the West.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's a warrior who has lost his lord and all his mates. They've all been killed, and he is trying to carry on his life, and he doesn't know how to do it. And like Mitch just said, this is so much close to where we are today. I don't know what you think, Mr. Streets.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me of the very first New York, which was actually several English men were disillusioned after the Norman conquest, so they went to work as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire, and basically Emperor Alexius gave them land in Crimea and northern Turkey, what's modern northern Anatolia. And they created all these villages, English villages, New York, New London, and that sort of place. So, that's the first thing that came to mind. It's the original New England, actually. It was in the Middle Ages.
Also, Mr. Streets, don't forget the Wagnerian Guard of the Eastern Roman so-called Byzantine Empire. After 1066, that became increasingly an Anglo-Saxon Wagnerian Guard. It was an English Anglo-Saxon Wagnerian Guard after 1066, more and more actually.
Yeah, they defended the walls of Constantinople in 1204. And it's interesting, actually, the son of Harold I'm not sure if it was the son of Harold Godwinson, but it's called Edgar the Atheling, and he was basically king of England for a couple of days after Hastings. But then after that, he commanded a fleet in the Mediterranean. He spent some time in Hungary and then went to the Italian cities, and then basically assisted the Byzantines in the First Crusade, ultimately in the Battle of Antioch, actually.
Yeah, loads of Anglo-Saxon lords went there with their followers, and they took their warriors there too. And like I said, the Wagnerian Guard after 1066 became increasingly an Anglo-Saxon Guard, actually.
And even after the Byzantine Empire fell, like the Knights Hospitaller in the island of Rhodes and Smyrna, they were actually 40% English and Scots as well.
No, I didn't know that. Thank you. I didn't realize that. Thanks, Mr. Streets. That's a new thing I didn't know. So
yeah,
cool.
Knights of Rhodes and Malta and all that.
No, that's cool. Look, we come from a warrior ancestry. Anyone who doesn't think that is really, really foolish. The English and British people come from a warrior ancestry. But we are being destroyed by our so-called leaders at the moment who are not our people. I mean, you know, Rishi Sunak is British. I'm sorry, he's just not.
Yeah, it's like you look at wars like from like the early modern period, for example. Like in every war, for example, you just get like either an Englishman or a Scotsman or an Irishman who fights on one side or another. Like you have, for example, like the Swedish, half their nobility are descended to like Scottish mercenaries who fought for them, from like Gustavus Adolf or someone.
Yeah, or to be fair, Mitch, a Welshman, there are some Welsh mercenaries also.
Yeah,
I can't think of any Welsh. Oh, sorry.
There are some.
Go on.
I can't think of any Welsh mercenaries on the top of my head who have the same level of success as like the Scottish mercs and like John Grant, for example, who was an engineer, I believe, who worked fighting for the Byzantines at 1453 against the Ottomans. So there's that as well.
Yeah. Well, there was a Welsh. Well, he wasn't very military, was he? I was going to say there was a Welsh engineer who created Kharkov, right?
Yeah, half of Donbass is practically. I mean, because you get Donetsk, which in Ukrainian is called Yuzivka.
Right.
And Yuzivka basically means Hughes City, because it was a guy called John Hughes who came from Wales. He built up half of Donbass because Donbass is a very coal mining area. So to a Welshman, that's like a second home in a way.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
When I lived in South Africa, Mitch, I knew loads of Welsh miner guys who'd left Britain when Maggie Thatcher was in charge, you know. And one of them was like completely best mates with an Afrikaner guy, and I couldn't work out why until I got to know these two dudes better. And then I realized that one day this Afrikaner guy's door almost drowned in his swimming pool. The Welsh guy knew how to do CPR, and he saved her and brought her back to life. That's why these two guys were like they were like cross-fingered guys. You couldn't separate them at all. So yeah, which I thought was great, by the way, because you know the one guy was an Afrikaner, the other guy was a Welshman. It's cool. I thought it was great, but yeah, absolutely, 100%.
I am struck by Spengler's view that the English are Vikings. Ever since I read that really resonated with me. Interestingly enough, a little bit of linguistics
I think
for
the
you.
English are anti-Vikings, to be honest, because we beat
yeah, I saw this, but I just think we were Vikings a couple of hundred years before.
Oh yeah, we might have been Vikings in the old days, but I mean, when the Vikings were the only people to defeat the Vikings were the Anglo-Saxons, and the Anglo-Saxon shield wall would stand there, and their war cry was out, out, out.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, like, because the Vikings came in like the late 9th century, a few hundred years beforehand, the English were like Anglo-Saxon pagans who were still yet to convert to Christianity, and then a couple of hundred years after they convert to Christianity and become like farmers and whatnot, they then have to deal with the Vikings. So it's kind of like two peoples who quite brotherly, Just it went two different ways to the point until the Danes and Norwegians went the same way as us in the end. So
yeah, exactly. Well, I'll give you this. Okay, I was brought up in the town of Warwick in Warwickshire. The Anglo-Saxon Warwick.
Part of England. That's a good part of England.
It's fantastic. Yeah, the Anglo-Saxon origin of that is Warwick, and that has the same roots as Viking and also Varangian. These guards of the Byzantine emperor.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I tell you what, there used to be a series on TV called The Last Kingdom, and the books are great, by the way. The same guy who wrote the Sharp books about the Napoleonic Wars, but the books are pretty good. The series was all right for the first 3 seasons, and then went totally feminist. But they finally made a movie recently called, let me think, 7 Kings Must Die. And that ain't bad. That is not actually bad. And they don't even give you a bad representation of a battle where the English finally won. Although the English are given these stupid rectangular shields, which they never had, because the Anglo-Saxons used round shields, pretty much the same as the Vikings. And the TV guys do that just to make you be able to recognize who's who, which is stupid, but it's what they do. But yeah, the 7 Kings Must Die is actually not bad. That's worth seeing.
I haven't watched past season 3. I need to.
Yeah, no, me neither, Mitch. I never watched it. I just watched this last movie they made at the end of the TV series, and that actually is not too terrible. There's no feminism in it, and it just goes to this last final battle where the Anglo-Saxons prevail, and fairly accurately. It's not shown badly, actually. You know, the guys are fighting in shield walls, and yeah, it's not bad. I would say that was okay. Someone says it was ruined by eyeliner. Well, maybe so. No idea. But yeah, that's not bad, actually. And I think you've got to look, as a modern English or British guy, you've got to look at your ancestors. And they were warriors. Overwhelmingly, they were warriors. Particularly in Britain, they became warriors on the sea, but they were always warriors.
Yeah, I can like that in the same way that, because you get some people on the right who will say, "Oh, the Italians are like too mixed with Arabs or whatever," and it's like, okay, the average Italian probably had the genetic continuity going back to the Romans at least. So
yeah. Look, I have no problem with Marcus. My great interest in history are I like ancient history. I like ancient Greece, and I read quite a lot about ancient Greece. But I really like ancient Rome. And then I can look at British history. You know.
Well, I can look at both, but that's because really those two words influence each other quite a lot. Because I mean, so for example, the word Greece, that comes from the Latin word Grecia, if I'm pronouncing that right, because they used to call it southern Italy Magna Grecia because there's so many Greek settled towns like Syracuse, Taranto,
south of Greece. And someone actually said earlier in the chat, there are some parts of that area in southern Italy where they still speak a form of Greek.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's like, yeah, you still have like some. I don't know if Greek is still spoken in some parts of like southern Ukraine with like you get those babushkas that Patrick Lancaster interviewed near Mariupol.
Oh yeah. Who said she was Greek? I remember that, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know too much about what. I mean, I know there'll be Greeks in that area. They're quite loyal to Russia for obvious reasons, but also because, I mean, you take, for example, the T-34 tank engine. I mean, that was invented by an ethnic Greek by the name of Konstantin Chelpan.
Yeah. To say nothing of the Orthodox Church, of course, which is, that's the Greek Church as well as the Russian Church.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, I mean, you have because the Russians back in the Greek War of Independence, they wanted to go the full hog on liberating all Greek Orthodox land, but then we just kind of stopped them from doing it for reasons.
All right, I got no idea if this is correct, but Duke Valentino is saying to you, Mitch, that in Calabria there are ethnic Greeks who still speak Greek. Why don't you know? I don't know. I'm not Mitch, and Mitch follows a load of different stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, there are. Well, looks of it from what I've seen. Yeah, because they've been there since since 800 BC, I believe. So,
well, I mean, as Mitch said, Magna Graecia is the southern Italian peninsula, basically. So it wouldn't be totally surprising.
Yeah, it's like you had Syracuse, where was it Archimedes came from that place, if I remember correctly?
Yeah,
or was it someone else?
Yes, it was Archimedes. Yeah, some Roman soldiers supposedly killed him. Bad Roman soldier, I have to say, but yeah, I think that's true. But Magna Graecia was absolutely all of the south of Italy, pretty much.
Yeah. I think it's around Crotone. Is it the modern Greek villages, or I'm not sure.
That makes sense, man. Yeah, that makes sense. Look, people are saying Mitch should know this. I mean, how much are you supposed to know? I know quite a lot about a few things and almost nothing about most things. That's like most of us these days, really. And Archimedes did work for the defense of Syracuse. Yes, he did. Victor Caleros.
Yeah. I don't even because I mean, you know more about ancient Rome than me. So I heard apparently recently on a video I watched that. So when Julius Caesar invaded Gaul, apparently there's a theory that the Celtic languages and Latin were still close enough to be mutually intelligible. Like they only broke up recently from one another by the time that Rome sets itself up. So that by the time the Romans invade Gaul, the languages aren't really that unintelligible. So apparently, when Julius Caesar invaded Gaul, he had his troops speak Greek and write only in Greek, not a single word in Latin, because apparently the Gauls were familiar with Latin. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Well, there were Greeks over there as well, though.
Particularly what's today Marseille.
Yeah.
That was a Greek colony and had been for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard because they reckon because they looked up archaeological evidence of the area, and they reckon that the Greeks in the area they mixed with the locals, and they have warfare styles that reflected that sort of mix between Greek and Celtic, apparently. Which I don't know how the Romans would have responded to such hybrid manner of warfare.
I think they would have been speaking Latin to themselves, but then gradually, as Rome took over Gaul, more and more of the elites of Gaul would have started speaking Latin. I think that's probably the way it happened.
Yeah, I'm
pretty much the way English spread in India, for example.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of the continuum theory, because in between the Celtic languages and Latin is Tuscany, and the Etruscan language is not an Indo-European language, or at least it wasn't. Yeah, and so there's this big block.
But we know almost nothing about that, even though the Emperor Claudius, before he was emperor, wrote a book about Etruscan, I believe. It's not survived into the modern world.
But that was after Caesar. Everyone loves Uncle Claudius. So if it was still spoken in the 1st century AD, there's still a barrier to it. But
Fred Wolf is asking in the comments, which I think is a good question. Are always portrayed as having fair skin? Is that just propaganda, or were they as light-skinned as us back then? what I would say to you, Frithwolf, is that there was a convention in ancient art that men were always portrayed as dark because they were out in the sun and got suntanned, and women were always portrayed as very light because they, if they were rich women certainly, or even middle class women, they didn't go out into the sun anything like so much. And that allows our modern race mixer people to try and tell us lies. All right. Roman men were always portrayed as relatively dark because they were out there, they were in the fields, or they were generals, or they were soldiers, and they were always out in the open air. Whereas, like, middle to upper class women, especially, were always portrayed as very pale because they didn't have to do that and didn't. And if they did, they had a big hat on, you know, a bit like British women in the 19th century. If you look at early settler women in America in the 19th century, or in Australia, or New Zealand, or Canada, or South Africa, you'll find the women are almost always shown wearing enormous, great big bonnets or hats to protect them from the sun. Men didn't do that anywhere in the like so much. Yeah. So I think most of that is a con. But you guys, Mr. Streets, Mitch, you might have a different opinion. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree, but I have to insist that the ancient Greeks, in particular from the Dorian invasion from the north, and the early Romans as well, they were absolutely Nordic looking. Specifically the Greeks, the modern Greeks now, that you can basically imagine they've got a much more Mediterranean type, that sort of stuff. That's from Bulgarian and Slavic invasions from the 6th and 7th and 8th centuries AD. So the ancient Greeks of classical era, they basically looked Nordic, essentially. You look at statues of guys like Sulla in Rome and Alcibiades and all the Spartan generals. They're heavily Nordic features, light-colored hair. Achilles was described as light-haired.
Achilles was famously described as somewhere between red-headed and blonde.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I'm more of a Western European, so I wouldn't really know much about Greek genetics, to be honest.
Well, there is, and this might really anger any Greeks in the audience, but the modern Turks, not only are they mostly Greek, like genetically, you look at guys like Ataturk, it's incredibly Nordic features, and a lot of the modern Greeks are Bulgarian,
but Western Turks like Izmir, Istanbul, Gallipoli, that sort of area. Yeah, they're basically just Greeks. I don't know whether east of the country though, because
they're more Kurdish. Yeah. A lot of the Kurds have very sort of Aryan features, like blue-eyed, green-eyed, that sort of thing.
You can even find that in Pakistan, Mr. Streets.
Yeah.
You
my business partners, green-eyed Pakistani. Yeah.
You can even find that there. And I will say, I went out with a Persian girl many moons ago now, and she was at least as white as I am, and I'm totally Anglo-Celtic. Apart from, I've got one Spanish great grandmother, so I'm like as Anglo-Celtic as you can get, pretty much. Apart from the fact I tan. Thank you, great grandmother. I went out with a Persian girl years ago, and she insisted she was Persian. She wasn't Iranian. She didn't like that at all. Wiggles is saying, "Iron Jew, academic age of me up." Yeah, all right, but yeah, she was as white as I was, yeah, the Persians, like they're not black or brown people. They're just not. It's a bit like when Africans try and say Egyptians were Africans. No, they weren't. I'm sorry, they just weren't. You were not kings.
Yeah. Well, famously, Iran comes from the term Aryan, and the Beshetun inscription of King Darius of Persia says it's on the inscription where he says, "I'm King of Kings, descended from a long line of Aryans." But what's not often talked about is Iran has the origin Aryan, but so does the term Ireland.
Yep.
Yeah.
And have you not seen the way, Mr. Streets, you must have seen it. Recently, we have seen the perversion of the term Black Irishman. Yeah. Whereas we all know a Black Irishman is a Irish guy who looks a bit Mediterranean. Yeah. But they've tried to convert it into somebody who is of a different race whatsoever, because for we know why, but whereas a Black Irishman is just a dark-haired Irishman who looks a bit Mediterranean, who might have maybe something to do with some of the Spanish Armada ships that ended up on the west coast of Ireland.
Interesting.
He might have something to do with that, but that's all he's got anything to do with. He's not brown or black in any state at all.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably only a matter of time before they try and change the terms of the Black Country in the Midlands in England.
For sure. I mean, that's Mitch's area, so yeah, maybe they might do that. And it was, of course, known as the Black Country for all the coal mines and the industry that was there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also things like a lot of the Romans used black stone for their sculptures, that sort of thing. There's a famous one of Scipio Africanus as well. I've seen that make the rounds.
Oh yeah, the bust. The bust, you mean? Yeah, that's very famous with the brilliant eyes and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic artwork. But,
it is. I mean, the Romans were great at that stuff. I mean, so are the Greeks, of course, but we have less of the Greek stuff still surviving. Victor Kaleros in the chat says, the Black Watch in Scotland. Yeah, that's going to happen. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen, sadly. But, yeah.
Well, it's like they tried to claim that York was some sort of like Middle Eastern bazaar because, they found some the old Abbasid Caliphate coins, I believe, in the ruins of Jorvik.
Yeah, it was a Viking town. The Vikings traded everywhere in the known world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they even made it to North America, for God's sake.
Yeah, so there's that. I mean, there was a woman, I can't remember, somewhere down south, like Essex or Sussex or somewhere like that, but tried to claim up like this buried woman, because they tried to claim that this woman was a Black African, because they said that they could tell that she was, she had like this apparently African haplogroup, So there was North African, and she would look more like a Carthaginian rather than a Black African. So it's the same with that story of Septimius Severus, who, because they tried to claim that Septimius Severus was
Yeah. That's a good one, Mitch. That's a good one.
Yeah, and then he saw a Black Ethiopian serving in a Roman legion up in like Iboricum, modern day York, and just told him to basically deport the guy.
Yeah, they always confuse Libyan with elsewhere.
Yeah, it's like they tried, it's like the same with that. It's like you get that bloody black woman on that Cleopatra documentary goes, well, I don't care what they tell you. Cleopatra was black.
Yeah, she wasn't a Greek princess who used to, and all her family used to marry within their family.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
So-
So, like, she was a Greek princess, and you can see busts of her, and she don't look very African to me. But yeah, she was a Greek princess because all the Ptolemies were Greeks.
Yeah. Well, they
I mean,
ended up-
all right, you can argue they were Macedonians, but I mean, they were Macedonians or Greeks. They were not, in any way, shape, or form, Egyptians.
I mean, Macedonians and Greeks practically were the same, though. Like, but we've spoken the
Well,
same
Macedonians are basically Northern Greeks.
Yeah,
They're,
it's
they're Northern
like
Greeks.
Macedonian.
So they're probably
Yes,
even more Greek than the Greeks. But
Sure.
yeah.
all from the Dorians. You know, probably about 800 BC.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit before that, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, totally true.
Although,
Sorry, I'm having problems because my lighter has died. So every time I want a cigarette, I have to go to my cooker. But yeah, I'll go and buy a lighter after this. But anyway, yeah, it's just crazy to me that all this nonsense can be spouted. And when I was a kid, you would have learned this at school. I mean, I learned at school that the Ptolemies were Greeks.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but you're not allowed to learn that anymore because people like Sunak and Biden, etc., they don't want you to learn it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the most concise answer to Firthwolf is Troy. The casting in Troy is pretty accurate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you know, Brad Pitt would make a pretty accurate Achilles, to be honest. Yeah, Eric Bana, you know, all these guys, pretty good casting.
I don't hate that film. It's like it's not the Iliad, obviously, but I don't hate that film. And all the guys are shown as classical Greek hoplites.
Yeah, accurate. Yeah.
But it's not a terrible movie.
Yeah, I think even if they added the god stuff, it would have made it a little bit too much little bit too complicated.
Well, they did a bit with Achilles' mother. They did a bit, although I don't think they really made it clear that she was a goddess. And to me, Hector was always ever since I read that. I think I read the Iliad when I was about 14 for the first time, and Hector's always been my hero because he was a normal human, and he knew he couldn't beat Achilles, but he still fought him when he had to.
I think one
a
of the
real
few...
villain.
Yeah, go on,
sorry.
please.
I was just gonna say, like, I mean, like people think of like Agamemnon as being the villain of it. I mean, and he did sacrifice his unbelieving daughter, but then you have Paris who starts it all.
He did sacrifice his own daughter. Yeah, that gets him killed when he comes home.
Yeah, and then you have Paris who lusts after another man's wife. Now, in 4 ways, going to cause a war.
Yeah, absolute scumbag. Paris is a scumbag. Total truth.
But it's easier to look at the movie and do that because it's all human action. Whereas in the original Iliad and the Golden Apple story and all this stuff, it's more like a lot of the times people's thoughts are coerced by the gods.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, still, Alexander the Great supposedly carried the Iliad with him on all these conquests, and I get that. Except I don't actually like Achilles very much. It's like, I don't like Achilles much. Like he's all about the glory and all the rest of it. And yeah, all right then. I think Hector is a much better dude because he's a dad and a father, and he'll fight Achilles when he has to, but he knows he can't win, but he will still fight him. That to me is real bravery.
Yeah, I'd say Alexander was kind of the opposite of Paris in real life, because Alexander was always very sexually restrained, at least when it came to women.
Yeah. Augustus had the same thing actually, or with Cleopatra.
I'm not sure that's true about Augustus.
Well, specifically with Cleopatra.
Oh, okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
she did try, but I reckon she was getting on a bit by then. She managed it with Julius Caesar and
Mark
Antony.
Antony.
Yeah, Mark Antony. Wow. I like Mark Antony, by the way.
Yeah, he's Chad. Well, and if you look at his statue, I think, Chad, he got a really thick neck, looks like a tough guy, and
a good soldier.
Yeah, exactly.
Caesar said he was a damn good soldier. But yeah, I'd like my Antony, but she wasn't getting anywhere with Augustus. No, indeed not. But then Augustus, I've got my issues with Augustus. I mean, he was a great ruler in many respects, but he butchered Antony and Cleopatra's kids for a start, which I would not agree with. I don't think you should do that to people's children, but I'm a pretty, I don't know, probably normal British guy in that respect. I don't like killing kids. I think it's a bad thing to do. But yeah, you're right about that. Who didn't lose his virginity till he was 23? Was that Augustus? Maybe. I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know. I always liked it in the movie. We ended up, in the series Rome. Rome is a great series.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
it's my favorite TV series by a long way. The first series is a lot better than the second one when they were getting cancelled and they had to rush over it. But that's a great TV series, and I kind of liked it where Augustus started whipping his future wife. I thought, yeah, maybe, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah. I thought, by the way, that was a great casting decision for Caesar in Rome. What was his name?
Oh, yeah. He's an Irish guy, isn't he?
Yeah, but it has fantastic sort of Roman nose. The only person who I've seen better than that, who played the original Duke of Wellington in Sharp?
I can't remember.
But the one, the guy I mean, like very.
No, he was good. He was good. I thought Christopher Plummer was excellent in Waterloo, to be honest. I thought he got Wellington totally in that movie. Obviously, it's only a little tiny window on Wellington, but I think Christopher Plummer played Wellington beautifully in that film. Really, probably his best part, to be honest. Wiggles. Syrian Hines was Caesar. Yeah. Right. He's an Irish dude, I think. But yeah, I thought he was a great Caesar. I also really liked the guy who played Mark Antony. I think he was really good too. But then, like I say, I like Mark Antony. I think he was a kind of a Chad dude, shall we say. But yeah, absolutely right. No arguments for any of that stuff. All right, guys. Any final thoughts?
No, great stream.
All right, guys. I'm very, very happy to have had Mr. Streets on this stream. And I'm very happy to have had Adaman back on this stream. He's always missed when he's not. And obviously Mitch as well. Thanks very much, gents. I will go and check if we have any super chats. So I always promise I will, and I occasionally forget. Here we go. We have one from EH for $10 USD. Halfway through the Quran at the moment. Bloody hell. Why do left-wing stroke centrist types who go on and on about women's liberation and universal human equality and tolerance get such a hard on for Islam bringing peace and love? Have they read it? Well, yeah, I'm sure they haven't.
It's incredibly right wing, to be
Yeah.
honest. I'm currently going through the Picknell translation, and I'm on book, like, for example, book 8. You know, what's book 8 of the Bible? Well, book 8 of the Quran is titled Al-Afnal, the Spoils of War. And it's all about the rules of when you conquer conquer an enemy city, what you're going to do with all the.
Am I not correct in saying, Mr. Streets, that, you know, those of the left-hand women you can grab, you can turn into your concubines and slaves?
Yeah, I've heard of that bit.
Sure.
I haven't got to that bit yet. I've heard of that one. I will verify. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very warrior-based religion. To be honest, it's like perfectly designed for a sort of warrior society.
Yeah,
it's very interesting. Actually,
I think Western warriors would have behaved like that in the Dark Ages for sure.
Yeah, totally. You know, I have so many actually some Sufi friends over here, and they say there's literally 95% overlap between the sort of stuff we talk about and the sort of stuff they talk about, especially on most social issues.
Yep. I can believe that. Let me just finish the quote from EH. Are they blinded by their Muslim friends being nice people? There you go. That's our super chat from EH, who is a lady, I do believe. Mitch, what's your opinion on that stuff?
I mean, I can generally agree that Islam is like a very warrior religion. I mean, you factor in like early Islamic expansion under Khalid ibn al-Walid, I believe his name, and so on. But like, there's a reason why it developed that way in the Middle East, but it didn't develop among, say, Germanic tribes or among the Romans. So, I suppose there's that. Because, I mean, I don't know what there is to say, because, I mean, Churchill apparently wrote in his book about how Islamic commerce was very backwards, yada, yada, yada. So, I don't know what others would say of that.
Islamic commerce, did you say?
Yeah, he said like Islamic commerce was very backwards compared to Western finance. I mean, this was like that book. I can't remember what it was, Along the River or something, where he's based in Sudan, where he was serving fighting against the Mahdists.
I think the only thing there's Islamic commerce. The only thing I can think of is interest is haram. In terms of the main difference, in terms of actual trade. So there's no usury in Islam, as most people know.
Yeah. I mean,
so is that actually illegal, Mr. Streets?
Yeah. So actually, they've been softening. So in terms of the Gulf states, the Sharia law Gulf states, they've been softening their stance on it, and it's actually getting quite controversial with a lot of the conservatives in the region. So like now bank accounts are offering savings rates and that sort of stuff. You know, it's interesting. There's a lot of informal money transfer systems as well. They call it the Hawala system, and it's basically a trust-based money changing system that doesn't have the fees that Jesus turned tables over and interest. Yeah, it's interesting, but a lot of these countries are softening their stances on it and allowing it, much to the dismay of the Islamic conservatives.
Is it true, Mr. Streets, that Saudi Arabia and some other regimes in that part of the world might join BRICS?
They've applied to it. Yeah.
So you think it's serious that Saudi Arabia might join BRICS?
Absolutely, and it's more as well. There's been a long time. There's been a long period with the BRICS
saying, okay, why is South Africa here? Because they don't pull their weight compared to China.
Which they don't, yeah.
Exactly, Russia and India. So the S in BRICS, it would be much more suitable if Saudi Arabia was the S rather than South Africa. That's a much more cohesive bloc.
For sure, yeah. I mean, oil, for God's sake.
Exactly. And also the Saudi Arabian and Abu Dhabi, UAE foreign policies are basically joined at the hip. Wherever one goes, the other follows.
What about United Arab Emirates and Dubai? Are they fairly close to there, or
they are absolutely close? They're tied to the hip to the Saudis. Yeah,
I would have thought so. Yeah,
they're in lockstep with this. Unlike, for example, Qatar, who is like an enemy of both.
Yep. But don't the Brits and the Americans have like naval bases, for example, in United Arab Emirates and stuff like that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of an incredible amount of diplomatic work goes through Dubai. So, for example, African countries negotiating with each other, the West negotiating with Russia, a lot of it comes through here. Yeah.
Wow, that's going to be interesting. Like, do you think they'll keep their bases there, or what?
The royal family of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but especially Dubai, they're absolute Anglophiles. They love England and the English, and they go to.
It's a trad thing, yeah. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, the current leadership of Abu Dhabi, basically, there was a guy with all the oil. I think his name was Sheikh Shakbut. I can't remember what I think his name was Shakbut. Anyway, he had all the oil, but he didn't spend any of it, and he didn't exploit any of it. And a lot of the locals who were still Bedouin and still, without electricity, were very angry at this. So the British helped this guy called Sheikh Zayed come in, and he's regarded as the founder of the United Arab Emirates from 1971 onwards. But he was installed with a British coup.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, the royal families of the UAE have been incredibly close to the British, not just geopolitically, but they have a great affinity for us. A lot of their big companies, they'll get an English guy or a Scottish guy or something like that to be their CEO. They trust us a lot. And Saudi Arabia is a little bit of a different story. They're much more, not quite isolationist, but how could you describe it? Isolationism combined with expansionism, if that makes sense. Cultural isolationism combined
really what you could say, I suspect, Mr. Streets, is that Saudi is now like not totally seeing its best way forward in the sphere of America anymore.
Yeah. So in terms of the Americans, they're trying to disassociate themselves from the Americans. But I predict that the Saudis are going to basically do what Turkey has been doing for the last few years, which is try and play off both sides as much as possible. So I don't think
that makes sense.
So I don't think there's going to be a radical switch, but I think Saudi's going to instead of being firmly in the American camp, I think the Saudis are going to try and play both sides as much as they can. However, in the UAE, Dubai is always going to be a merchant city. It's always going to try and be open to everyone.
Not so much United Arab Emirates, but like I also look at Oman, and like Oman also had a British-backed coup in the 70s, I think.
Yes.
But we had the Special Air Service there, and the Parachute Regiment, Royal Artillery, and actually fought a fairly big war there, which almost no one back in England knew about. But again, like Oman has loads of British dudes in its military and all the rest of it. So yeah, interesting to me because I knew about Oman. I didn't know about United Arab Emirates.
So with Oman, the guy who got installed by the British, he ruled from 1970 until 2020, Sultan
Yep.
Qaboos.
Yep.
And basically he was very conservative, including economically. So it's kind of regarded in the area like when there's any innovation or new construction project, Dubai will be first, then followed by Abu Dhabi, and then Oman will kind of dip its toe into the water. They're basically like the Ents from the Lord of the Rings, you know? We make decisions slowly. That's the Oman, the Omanis.
Mhm.
But the thing is, the Sultan died 2 years ago. Now there's a new Sultan, and he wants to move things in a new direction. So, especially considering, you know, the wealth that's been built in the UAE in particular.
Mhm.
Dubai, for example, wasn't actually built on oil. It was built on municipal bonds across the market. Abu Dhabi has all the oil, basically. And so they see the success of Dubai as an international hub and just all the amazing stuff that's been built over the last 30 years. And they want a piece of the action. So
yeah, I could see Oman wanting some of that for sure because it's still a relatively poor and backward country. Yeah, 100%. Totally. I don't know. I find this stuff interesting. 20 years ago, I would have said, "Oh yeah, great, Brits are still popular there," but I don't like Enoch, so and I wouldn't fight for him either. I don't know how this will turn out. Like I say, 20 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, the Brits are popular in the Middle East. Good stuff, great." But I don't like Rishi Sunak. He's an Indian banker, not an Anglo-Catholic British person, or any sort of British person. So I don't know how I see this ending up. I guess people like yourself, Mr. Streets, will end up working on your own. What's the word? You'll end up working on your own reputation, I guess. Because like I've known guys who worked in Saudi, for example, and said like that Saudis were the laziest people I've ever met in my entire life. But if you were a British guy who worked there and you did your stuff, it was all good, you know. Which may or may not be true, I don't know. But yeah, to me these days, like old-fashioned patriotism, unless you're talking about your own people rather than your own nation, doesn't make a lot of sense because I don't care how popular Britain is in the Middle East because it's not Britain, it's Rishi Sunak and the globalist elites, you know.
You'd be shocked how many Arabs feel the same way.
I maybe wouldn't be, but yeah, all right.
They're really confused about they're really confused about our political situation. They don't get it.
Yeah, Britain used to stand for something, and it no longer does at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't actually be all that shocked with that, to be honest. Mitch, what are you on?
I don't really know what to. I mean, I'm not an expert on the Middle East, but I mean, I'm hearing of, like, for example, Saudis doing a détente with Iran, which quite interesting because I mean, they used to be massive Cold War kind of foes, but then I hear like, okay, that the Saudis aren't going the full hog in rejecting the US. Like they will trade with both sides and just get the best deal, like Erdogan will do, where Erdogan will act like a snake and just negotiate with both sides for his own personal for his own benefit. So there was that. But like,
3 years ago, Saudi was friendly with Israel and incredibly hostile to Iran, and now they're lukewarm with Iran. They've cooled down with Iran, but Israel, they've gotten really tired of them over the last couple of months because they haven't fulfilled their obligations of the Abraham Accords. So these things do change quite quickly, but hopefully, this Saudi-Iranian detente is going to have big consequences. In particular, the biggest consequence so far, other than ending the Yemen war, has been Syria is now part of the Arab League again. So it's now a fully fledged, part of the international community now.
Yeah.
Did you ever believe, Mr. Streets, that the Syrian president dropped chemical weapons on his own people? Because I never believed it.
Yeah,
I always thought it was nonsense. Why would he do that?
Of course. And well, this is the thing. I mean, Syria, on top of that, now they're leaving this terrible war over the last 10 years. Syria has always been a wealthy area for thousands and thousands of years now. Damascus, Aleppo. I mean, there's some of the Antioch. Well, that's not quite in Syria.
Some of the great cities of the Middle East, for sure.
Completely. And so I think Syria will bounce back at some point, because they always do. And they're great people. It's interesting talking about the question before about the Greeks and the Nordics and all this stuff, and a remarkable number of Syrians, and including what you were talking about, that Iranian girl, they look very European.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely more pale than average Anglo-Celts.
Yeah. Loads of Christians as well. Very highly educated population.
I'll tell you another one, mate. Years ago now, not as many years ago as when I went out with the Persian girl, but in Australia, I went out with a Lebanese Christian girl. Again, she was as white as me. She was a former air hostess, very cute, and as white as me. And she was a Lebanese Christian girl. Again, what would anyone have against a Lebanese Christian girl, for God's sake?
Precisely. There's some great people.
I don't get some of that stuff that happens on the right. But yeah, I do. Things are changing. Yeah, they are changing. And I like that you pointed out that people in the Middle East are working out that British policy is no longer pro-British, which is the truth. It just is. Rishi Sunak ain't British, and he doesn't run a pro-British policy. Were I a young man today, I wouldn't join the British Armed Forces if you gave me a £50,000 bonus. I would not join them. Because you're not going to end up dying for England or Britain. You're going to end up dying for vile corporate globalists. You don't give a shit about your nation anymore.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, a lot of these Gulf monarchies, super rich Gulf monarchies, working for them, you'll have a lot more dignity, and you'll be able to keep all your ancestral traditions and all that sort of stuff. They'll respect that a lot more than our home countries do.
100%, mate. 100%. I know guys who have worked for the Omani monarchy, for example, like as officers and what have you. So yeah, absolutely, 100%, totally agree. All right, this has been a very long stream. Thank you for staying, Mr. Streets, longer than you said you could. Really happy to have you on the stream, and a lot of good insights into certain parts of the world.
Yeah, it's good. 10 to 4 at the moment, but worth it.
Oh, look, mate, 9:47 a.m. for me. But I got a decent sleep last night, so Mitch, thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, thank you to Alman, who's one of our regulars. Thanks, guys. And I'm going to play us out of a tune if it works. We'll see.
Cool. Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Cheers.
Okay, that was from the excellent channel Patriotic Archive, and it was the Regimental March of the Royal Horse Guards, who are the blues bit of the Blues and Royals these days. Thank you very much to my guests, Mr. Streets, Mitch, and Adaman. We'll see you next week, although actually I hope halfway through next week to have part 2 of the Wellington stream, which is basically going to be about Wellington in the Peninsular War. But I will see if I can organize that. So let's do that. Go well, folks, and never let the bastards grind you down. Good night, people.